And we will allow for our crowd building to happen and folks from the community to join us and other task members. We'll get started here in about 5 minutes. While we're getting folks on, I need everyone on this call tonight to send as much energy as possible to the Phoenix Suns so that we can sweep the Bucks.
I know who they are now, Jevin, so I'm in full support.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm proud.
You have lost Ajamel.
Man, we made so much ground too over the last like 9 months. Ajamel, come on now. Just for the house of cards to fall down like that.
Are you from Phoenix?
I'm born and raised.
No, I didn't know that. All right, well, congratulations. I was definitely circa 1992. I was definitely rooting for your Suns.
The Barkley, and that was a dream team right there.
Yeah,
so we're bringing
Thunder
it back.
Dan. That's right.
That's right, Thunder Dan Marley.
Chev was on their community foundation board for a while, and they did some good work. That was my introduction to them, and so we will see.
My first year on the foundation board, we brought out Shaggy to be our entertainer for our fundraiser. Good times. With that, we'll get started here in about 3 minutes. We'll get things going. We'll give folks a few minutes to join and community members a few minutes to make their way in. Kim Minori, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too.
Adam, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Michael Rubin, as the basketball season concludes, the football season comes to a begin. Now you're getting excited?
Yeah. I decided to do a second dynasty league, so we're going to do another slow draft starting next week. So I think it'll start right after this task force ends, so it's perfect timing. So
my gosh, that's insane. That is insane. Well, it's exciting and insane.
The basketball season never ends.
That is true.
That's true.
That is true. Basketball season never ends. We have the Olympics, which is really exciting. Can't wait for that. Sadie, how's your knee?
It's pretty good. I can start running in like a week, hopefully. Yeah, it's exciting. I did a lot of walking this weekend too, and it felt good. So
Good. I feel like we've been on this journey with you.
Yeah, really since the start. So yeah, I'm definitely a lot better.
So glad to hear that you're healing well.
Yeah.
That's great. Good evening, Jemana. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Can't complain. Can't complain at all. We will get started here in about 90 seconds. We'll give community members and task force attendees a few more seconds to join, and then we'll get started here. All right. Sounds good. Dwayne, welcome. Okay.
Hey, hey, Jevin, how you doing?
Wonderful. Good to see you and hear you.
Absolutely.
That's right. Well, we'll get things started here. And it's 5 minutes after the half hour. And welcome to the July 6th installment of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you so much for joining us. And to the community members out there today, thank you for joining us as well. Molly, if you get the PowerPoint up for us really quickly. We'll zip through the beginning slides, but we're going to get things kicked off today. Today will be a very focused meeting. We're going to drive through our action. We had some dialogue over the weekend and appreciate those who provided their thoughts. And we want to have conversation about that today in public forum and public settings. So we're grateful for you. As you all know, the charge is what we've been working on this entire time here. We want to make Takoma Park a more livable, safer city for all of its residents. And we're grateful for your input and all that you've done to be part of that. The timeline. We have this meeting today where we're going to lock in, we're going to take a dive into the recommendations as they stand now with the comments and edits from task force members. We will use this meeting to take a comprehensive look at this. We're going to go line by line. Michael's going to lead us through a dynamic conversation, and then we will have another conversation. As you all have seen from email traffic over the weekend, we are going to add another public meeting at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, July 8th, where we will use that meeting to finalize all of the recommendations that we have discussion about today, and then throughout the next few days here, and prepare us for the July 13th community listening session. Thank you, Molly, to prepare us for the July 13th community listening session, where we will have our dialogue with the city council. So task force members, as we head into that conversation, I want us to really think about the importance of prioritization of the goals, and then the actions that we are working to achieve through the report. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have members from the steering committee with us to answer technical questions that we may have or to provide clarity. We have Mayor Kate Stewart joining us. We have Chief of Police Tony Duvall joining us. We will have Acting City Manager Jessica Clark joining us as well to provide insight for, and I believe Councilmember Searcy is going to join us a bit later to provide any technical guidance or answer any technical questions that we may have with regards to the recommendations that we have in place currently. And so let's lean on them. Let's be sure to ask those critical and tough questions that we have. And I want us to be sure that we come to a resolution today so that we can really lean into Thursday and drive towards action of finalizing the report as it is. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jamal, and he's going to talk about the public engagement pieces of this. And then Michael is going to lead us through dynamic discussion with regards to the recommendations as they stand thus far. So thank you all for your input. Jamal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jevin. And kind of just want to talk through really all of the things that have been requested and really the goals for this meeting that Jevin shared. So the things that you all asked for and things that we've shared, and want to just get a surface level, a room check on if there's anything else needed as we finalize recommendations. So request one was for the 911 call flow chart. So we sent that over. Thank you to the chief for sending that over. Request two was the domestic violence stats from dispatch calls and what percentage of calls were made to dispatch that were related to domestic violence. So sent over that bar chart and kind of some breaking down some of the nuance and some of how that data is reported. And then the other request was, and this is what we're still working with the city to get, is the officer pension for same-sex marriage information. So once we get that, we'll share that with you all as well. Request 4 was the citation numbers at the state level for guiding regulations related to search warrants. That was included in SB 178. And that was in the package of bills that was also provided last week in Michael's email. Request number 5 was information regarding housing violations from the state. Again, we're working to get that to you all as well. Request number 6 is information on the $800K in the budget. So I know the chief provided some context on that and some comments around that. And then request number 7 was around any policy or guidance around the level of traffic stops and enforced. So that guidance and information was shared. The other thing I want to share that was requested, and I'll share a screen here on the document that was asked on engagement numbers based on engagement with the Takoma Park residents and how many folks we've engaged over the years. I mean, not over the years, it feels like years, but over the months. So we kicked off our process with some stakeholder interviews and some focus groups with 14 different individuals. And some of those included one-on-one interviews, and some of these were focus groups where with residential managers, tenants, and multifamily units, clergy, and community residents. And we also hosted a focus group interview with the leadership of the Montgomery County Task Force, and that was to really inform and kind of focus some of the efforts in the early part of this process. We also did a business walk at Takoma Langley Crossroads and engaged approximately 8 businesses, including the owners and staff of those businesses. We then hosted a focus group with Takoma Park police officers, and this was about 14 different officers who ranged in background experiences and representation and the amount of time that they've been on the force or even retirees from the department. We then did a focus group with 7 ambassadors, and these were the folks who applied to participate in the task force but were not named to the task force, but agreed to really help us with staying engaged throughout the process, and the age range was pretty vast there, and the demographics and the folks we engaged. The community listening sessions were held throughout the work of the task force. So we held 3 different community listening sessions. We did not collect attendee demographics, but for each one of those sessions, April 29th, we had about 50 registrants. May 25th was 16. And then our most recent one was 9. And then as of July, there have been a total of 17 task force meetings that were streamed and recorded. So these meetings were consistent of the meetings that we're in now, that were ranging from 1.5 to 2 hours in length, and averaged approximately 25 attendees. And that includes task force members, steering committee members, and community members. So on average, the weeks were different. There were about 2 to 5 members of the public watching in real time. Every one of these meetings are recorded and posted on YouTube for viewing after. All of those meeting totals were about 402 views across all recordings and all of the meetings that we've partaken in during this process. Public comment comprised of 41 different individual submissions from the public, from the community via the Takoma Park website, and 40 feedback comments made via the chat function during our meetings. And we comprised all of those and shared those with you all as well. The task force meetings, sorry, this is a duplicate, so let me remove that, but that's pretty much a synopsis of the breakdown in numbers and who we've engaged over the past 6 months. Is there any other data points or any other things needed to kind of help us move to a final, as we're moving to the final pieces of the recommendations? Anything else?
Just one quick thing, Jamal. We did send an answer to number 3. Jevin sent that on Friday. We can resend it if helpful about the pension plan information, but Ms. Clark did provide that and it was shared. And then Mr. Rubin, this was at your request at our last meeting. Can we quantify some of the engagement and get it on one page? So that's what Jamal just shared out, but anything else that folks are looking for, and we will email this around. We just got the viewership numbers right before the meeting tonight, but we can send that around for a further review. Anything we're missing there? So everything that was requested has been provided at this point, other than we're still trying to verify if the county keeps any of the housing citation data on their website. And if so, can we link to it through ours, or if that's a separate and standalone data request? That's the one that's still outstanding. But I think everything else that's been requested at this point has received an answer. But we know we're in the home stretch of this, so we want to verify that. Are there any other data requests outstanding for the city that people are still looking for more information on?
Before folks jump in, Michael, I do just want to highlight that the document we just shared, we'll send it via email, but that to really highlight, that's really robust engagement and a vast amount of people who, it's not 17,000, but it's really a good capture and number of folks that we've engaged over the past 6 months to really get feedback. So we'll send that around.
Okay.
Awesome.
Anything else, Jamal?
No, I'll toss the mic over to you, my friend.
Got it. And I will screen share here. And thank you. There were a couple different task force members who reached out at some point this weekend and said, there's so much stuff to keep track of. We do this better when we're together as a group, which I fully agree with. And so thanks for the agreement to add that additional meeting on Thursday. I think if we have tonight as a solid work session for the rest of our time together, we can get an updated draft back around and posted so that on Thursday, we're really, really working to finalize this. Absolutely. And Michael and Jide and Ajmel, because the sessions were recorded, we have the number of attendees who are at those meetings as well. I think we'll go back and look at that, but we did the signups because our guess is some of the folks who didn't watch it live but signed up are contributing to those 400 people who watched it after the fact, but we can go back and pull that information directly if that's helpful. We can slice and dice as much data as we have access to. So for today, I'm going to screen share, and I want to do this in a way that the public can see what we're working on as well. You have sent extensive thoughts over the last week since we've been together, which is great. Some of them, or I would say the majority of them, weren't sent as specific edits. They were sent as questions. Could the task force member or subcommittee that worked on this piece explain what they were going for so I can understand if I agree with it or not? So we want to work through those tonight and try and come to some resolution. You'll see in about 3 of the items, there's been a really healthy back and forth where folks have said, I don't know that we're going to get to agreement on this one point. Could we do a majority feel this, a minority feel this, to try and show that there are a couple different perspectives, which I think is a fine and elegant solution on some of these. The other thing that the city has asked us to think through is this is still a lot of recommendations. There are, I think, 42 things on this list. When this goes to the council, understandably, the council is likely to say, if we can't get to all 42, what's the prioritization behind these? We want to know what we need to do to think through that. Is there a prioritization of these, or are they going as these 42 things need attention? And we will figure out in an ongoing process how to prioritize them. So some guidance around that. And then the last thing I'll mention is we started by doing all of these as subcommittees. We then moved them into groupings by topic to make sure that things weren't duplicative. And that was really helpful. They are still organized by topic. As we're going through them today, think with us, are these the right topics? Is this too many topics, too little? Can these be further combined into different section headings? Again, not looking to edit content, but there's a way to combine these to make them clearer. And some of you have been really, really helpful in sharing your suggestions around that. Does that sound right to everybody? Okay, let me screen share here. I will attempt to make this as large as possible. Okay, here we go. Perfect. And the other, I see a question that came in from a community member who's viewing about the data that was being provided to the task force and how that will be made public through this process. So one of the things we're doing right now is working to take anything that was in the review items folder for the task force and make sure that that lives in Takoma Park's file servers going forward so that we can link to them through the final report so that the information is out there and available going forward. Let me start scrolling through this. These are the topic areas, which we'll all see here. I'll give you one thing right off the top. A lot of the comments coming back is that data might not need to be its own topic area. Data should be in support of many of the other things we're talking about. So if there's agreement on that, we can just move things out of that topic area to where they need to be. Jide?
Yeah. So when I was watching some of the community sessions over the weekend, I think one of the attendees made a good point that I still don't necessarily know that we've addressed, which is whether or not the individual goals are targeting something that's specific to Takoma Park or whether or not they're addressing national issues. Is it possible for us to have that as a field, like under the goal? Like, this is addressing an issue that we see in Takoma Park, or this is a national issue, but because we want to safeguard Takoma Park, we're doing this or whatever, something like that.
Thank you, Jide. I think as we go through here, the goals are becoming really important, and there's still a few that don't have information. So as we're going through them, please keep that top of mind, and we'll see if we can add that in, because I think it would be helpful for a lot of these. Let me scroll down here to get to this first section. Mr. Rubin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I actually believe data should be its own section. I'll just put that out there because I think especially for Takoma Park that's made a real commitment to racial equity, without good data, there's no way to know that we're making any progress on that front. And I kind of feel like if you just like have it supporting other goals, you might not get everything you need. And I think it's important enough to be standing on its own.
I appreciate that, Michael. When we get down to that section, help me think through. There are a couple of them that are just, they don't make sense where they are. So it might be that we need to pull down, or like this relates to this goal so that they relate a little bit more, but very well taken. So this one, I think we're in a really good spot overall on. This was saying that the work of the task force has gotten us so far, but there needs to be a citizen component, a community-led component going forward. So I'm going to scroll down, and what you'll see here in the comment bubbles are comments that came in from members of your task force over the last few days. We're trying to make these as transparent as possible. We're, again, not changing any of the text, but I think there's some stuff in here that we need to come to some agreement on. So this one talks about how the Takoma Park Public Safety Task Force shall review and issue recommendations regarding, and it lists a few different things. Kiminori asked here, why would apartment inspection and guidelines be part of what the task force is looking at? And if we're going to get to that level of detail, should we also include other things that could broadly fit under public safety, such as jobs, food, healthcare, etc.? So we'd love to get some clarity on the folks who drafted this one on if there's something specific about apartment inspection guidelines as being called out here, or do we want to say, etc., like it would be these types of issues and more. Anyone have a strong feeling on that? Ajmal said this was not one of his. Anyone's group know where that one came from, or?
I mean, I apologize for raising my hand.
No, you're fine. Jump in.
I mean, I think that I can speculate, but I think it really depends upon the drafter to speak up. I think that it could be one of two things. It could be a concern that individual inspectors are coming into individuals' residences or in their apartments, and they're criminalizing things that shouldn't be criminalized. Or it could be the converse. It could be a situation where it's a social services problem and apartments aren't in sufficient shape for the renters who live there, and we want to be monitoring the requirements for landlords so we avoid a situation where landlords aren't providing proper necessities for the individuals who live there. I could imagine a situation where it's either of those, but that's just my speculation.
Others? Any other thoughts on this one? So I think these are the type of changes that if no one feels strongly about them and you're in a group that didn't feel strongly, it's good to edit so that we don't have things hanging out there that when the council asks, what's this from? We don't have an answer. But if this is a good example of the types of things you would want the task force to look at, I would recommend we rewrite it as they should look at these types of issues and then have kind of for example. Kiminori?
Is this about the county inspection, or is this something that the city is doing?
Christine, I saw your hand up. Do you have any insight on this one?
So the only thing I was going to say that came up was that on 2 separate occasions, our group talked about like housing violations, like that things aren't up to where there's renters, things aren't necessarily up to code. And there was questions that I think got asked to the woman who was early in our visit, who's over housing, around like, how is that being tracked and monitored? And so I feel like maybe this came from that, but I keep rereading it to see exactly, like there's this concern that buildings aren't necessarily safe, and this is to protect renters. But this is very specific, so I'm just sharing what I remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Mayor Kate, do you want to jump in? I saw you threw something in the chat box.
No, somebody had asked like who does the inspections right now for the city of Tacoma Park. We have a contract with the county code inspector, so they come in and do it. We actually inspect our buildings more frequently than the county does inspections for apartments in the county. And over the years, we have evaluated that process and whether or not we want to switch, what are other options. And so that's something we do periodically. I don't know if that's helpful information for the group.
So what I'm putting down here is a bullet where we can start listing out the types of things we would want the task force to talk about. And that could include, we are going to look at these issues, or we are going to look at them in the context of what should be in and out of the purview of this expanded task force. So it could almost be like a scoping discussion of the group as it comes together. Does that sound like a good way to address that? Go ahead, Ajmal.
I agree. It shouldn't be up top because I think it gives the flavor just as a matter of sort of statutory interpretation that is like the overguiding principle for the task force. And it's not. I think it could be a good example for the reasons that Christina pointed out, but giving it such prominent placement misemphasizes the role it should play, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'm going to move it down here as an example. Kiminori?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I was just reading the public comment early on. It says tenants do not report to landlord for fear of retaliation. Need to do better to ensure that all residents feel safe and landlords are held accountable. So I think that's maybe part of that concern. Maybe part of that, the immigration status and all these other things are also involved as well. But I just couldn't tell what this is getting at. So it'd be good to flesh out then.
Many of your comments were really helpful in helping us focus on, okay, what are we trying to get at here? And does it do that? And if not, let's update it. The other thing I think this does helpfully is it takes a broad view of public safety. It says we're looking at a lot of things, including housing. And I think that's consistent with the goal, et cetera. This one was more of a comment of, we recommend that members of the committee be offered a stipend because this takes a lot of time and effort. There wasn't any real pushback to that. It was just, I think that makes a good idea. I don't know if that's typically done. Any additional thoughts on that one? This bullet here, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, that was brought up, I know, before, and it was done in Montgomery County for one of the racial equity task forces to make sure that you really could get a cross section of the community. So I think it's important to be in there. That's all.
Yep. Why don't, Michael, you just said something really interesting. What if we added the justification into this one to, ensure equitable participation and to compensate task force members for their time, something like that?
I thought we had that kind of text in our section. I may be wrong, but I know that we talked about it. So, but yeah, that would be fine. Just wherever it goes.
Got it. And we got a lot of people from my team taking copious notes tonight. So when I say add Y, we'll take what was just said and add this in here for the next draft here. We recommend some kind of citizen oversight. This one seems to be accomplished through all of the other stuff in this document around citizen oversight. So a couple of the questions were like, is this still needed? Should we delete this? Any pushback to deleting that here? And if not, we need to add a little bit more specificity because it doesn't really say citizen oversight of what. If we're talking about police complaints or of other things, that's addressed elsewhere. And this is a community-led body. So by its very nature, it's a community body. So is it okay if we X that one out, or does anyone have more to add to that?
Let's delete it.
Perfect. Okay. Made it through the first page. This one right here, it seems like a lot of new text. Lots of credit to Adam and his group. They were going back and forth on what this should be written like. So I'm going to scroll down. Don't want to make anyone dizzy, but I'm going to scroll down here. This is what we had before. It was saying that one of the goals here was a new citizen oversight function that could either be a citizen oversight board or an auditor function. Based on lots of back and forth and discussions, et cetera, it appeared in our last meeting there was more leaning towards an auditor function. Adam provided some updated text around that. There is an active debate among his committee on some pieces of this. So Adam, with your permission, I'd actually love to turn this over to you just to give an overview of what's in here. One of the questions you'll see up here became, do we need this level of specificity? It seems a lot more specific than the other recommendations, or do we need this level of specificity because it's a very complicated topic? So if you can give a quick overview of that, and then we can go into the back and forth that's happening within your committee and go from there.
Yes, and I agree with Mayor Kate that resident is a much better term than citizen. I apologize for reverting to my talk. But I think that the specific auditor points are pretty clear from the text, so I don't want to just march through what we anticipate the auditor doing. But I think this is the G-Day's point about whether this is addressing something specific in Takoma Park or just getting Takoma Park in accordance with national best practices. I think it's the latter. We just think there should be some civilian oversight mechanism because that's a best practice, and the civilian review board version of this that we had before really didn't jive with the new laws that are taking effect next year. So this is a couple options for the city, and this sort of a nod to Christy Lopez's advice to us, which is that you could have someone who has a number of responsibilities and this police auditor function is just part of it. Or as an alternative, you could have this be a section of the subcommittee, a subcommittee that is a section of the Public Safety Task Force that would be continuing on. And I think G-Day's comment about the specificity was specifically about the Dixon investigation. Is that right?
Yep.
I think that, yeah. So that I hear. I think it was just something that a couple people had, and Jumana and I think a couple others agreed at the last meeting that was something we didn't want to just leave completely unaddressed. But we also learned very recently that there is a fairly robust internal investigation that's ongoing. I don't know if the chief has any updates on that or when results are going to come out of that, but I would love those larger groups' thoughts on whether we should tweak this a little bit to just say we recognize that this is coming, and something that the auditor can do is evaluate what that internal investigation found and what needs to happen going forward.
Got it. Thank you, Adam. And I did send around the statement from the chief as you referenced. Chief, I understand there are things you can't talk about, but from a timeline standpoint, is there any broad timeline you can share with us that might inform debate on this?
Michael, can I just add, though, part of the goal of that too
Please.
is to ensure not just that an auditor or somebody like that reviews it, but that there is sort of the maximum amount of transparency with whatever comes out of this, that there can be, considering all the other rules and laws and investigations. So transparency was a fundamental goal, not just sort of an auditor oversight.
Okay. Thank you, Jumana. Chief, anything you can add to the timeline, just in broad strokes?
As I mentioned in the message to the group, our timeline for completion was a little bit complicated when the Pentagon Police decided to go back and reinvestigate their investigation of the May 2020 incident, and that involved interviewing several of our staff and so on and so forth. So that has been completed. We are in the process of just finalizing our review of the incident. We want to put outside eyes on that just to make sure that we have an impartial view of it. Once that's done, we plan on putting out a statement, all the information we can publicly about what we discovered, what we're changing, whether that be policy changes and so on and so forth. So I wish I could give you a timeline because it involves another outside entity. I can't give you the distinct timeline. We were hoping, as I said earlier, to be able to discuss our findings the best we can with protecting the confidentiality of employees involved and so on and so forth with the task force. So I'm hopeful that we'll have it soon. And as Jumana said, we're going to be as transparent as we possibly can about things we even if what our policy at the time, if the officers adhere to that, maybe that wasn't the best policy, and putting in place policies and procedures so nothing like this happens again. That's what our goal is, and our goal is to be fully transparent about that. So I wish I had more of a timeline, but I don't at this point.
Thank you for that. So here's what I'd like to do. There's a lot in this one. Lots of work has gone into it. I'd like to do this kind of 3 ways. I'd like to start with a goal. Is the goal what it needs to be? Any edits needed to this, just so we make sure we have the framing right, because it's a pretty significant amount of detail. Second, are we comfortable with the text that Adam provided around the auditing function? And then third, how do we want to reference the Dixon incident in here? Is this an example of, is it a specific question or mandate? So let's kind of take it in that order. No one had edits to this goal. I'm just going to ask this for everyone just to make sure it's as specific as possible per the council wanting to make sure they understand what the intent is. So the goal, provide for non-police oversight of Takoma Park PD to ensure that its policies and practices are fair, lawful, unbiased, and evidence-based. Is that any edits to that goal, or does that one capture it? I know there's a risk at taking silence as agreement, so that's why I'm pausing a little bit extra here. It's also, you know, I think helpful to know, yeah, resident oversight, non-citizen, is if we're correcting for something specific, or if we're laying out that, you know, best practices indicate. I think those can be helpful as well. Chief?
It would be helpful if this was more based on national narrative, or if there's something specific outside of the Dixon case that the task force determined that, you know, we were not doing or did. So it'd be helpful for us as we look inward on how to absorb and how to review these recommendations to know that. So I don't know if this was more based on a national need for oversight, or if this was something something that happened to the Takoma Park. And I see Adam just put something in the text.
Adam, I got your comment in the chat. And Juman, I see your hand. Go for it.
I think also from my perspective, I have heard from people who felt like the complaint process was kind of a black hole, where people would make a complaint and then it's a very internal process and not a lot comes back. And so I think it's best practices, but at least for me, it's also things that I've heard incidentally from people over the years. And that's not to say that there's been, you know, disastrous policy for years and years. I think sometimes those comments are taken as if we're hypercritical, but just the simple fact that people feel like there's been kind of, that the process itself is internal and kind of a black hole that without a lot of transparency or understanding for the people who are trying to engage the process. To me, that's part of it as well.
Got it.
If I can just say, we have always said, I have always said that the MPIA and the LEOBR restricts our ability to be transparent. So that wasn't a Takoma Park thing. That was more of a state thing. So I'm really, you know, I'm glad to see that the MPIA and some of the LEOBR stuff with personnel records is being, you know, opened up. So we're able to be much more transparent, because I've always said that would really help us out as an agency. So I think it's consistent with the new laws in place, and it's going to allow us to be much more transparent with our residents.
Got it. So I'm going to move us. I'm not seeing other hands, but keep coming to the chat box, or put your hand up if you want to go back to any of this. Adam proposed the language here. And Jessica is asking, as we think through the auditor, as the task force got into the level of detail, do we see this as a permanent long-term position? Is it a one-time assessment and audit? How have we thought about this in terms of staffing? Anyone want to speak to that?
I think this is more of an ongoing position, that it just serves as sort of someone who brings in community concerns and crystallizes them and presents them to the police department as they manifest themselves. And we're, I think, sensitive to the idea that that may not be something that requires a full salaried position. So maybe that's part of someone else's job from the neighborhood services division or something like that. Or it could be that, you know, if you can get the right volunteer civilian members of the permanent task force that can do it, that could be another model. But I think Christy Lopez's expert opinion was that this is not something that would need a permanent, you know, full-time job, and I have any reason to disagree with her on that.
Thank you. I see Jessica nodding. Jumana?
I think we also thought of it as, you know, not necessarily just auditing police functions, but city functions, so that it could be applied more broadly than, you know, just the police department in terms of an auditor position. And again, whether it's like a position, it's, you know, you have a consultant that you frequently go back to, you have whatever the model is. I agree with Adam, and that we definitely saw this as an ongoing thing. But, you know, the exact staffing model is not, I don't think we were bought into one or the other, unless, you know, someone else to say otherwise on my committee.
And then Adam and Jumana, this number 2, is this an or is it an auditor, or we would go back to the subcommittee structure, or do we want to leave both of these in? Because it seems like most of the text is around the auditing function. You're saying it could be a person or a committee, but the function would look like this. Am I getting that right?
Have my very carefully placed semicolon and or at the end of number 1.
Yep. So leave in the subcommittee model as well as an option.
Yeah, I think we want to give the city flexibility. Sorry, go ahead, Gina.
Well, also for me, I think the subcommittee is a broader purpose. And so I don't see it as like there's an auditor or like from my perspective, I see the need for a subcommittee separate from this issue, right? Thinking about ongoing implementation, thinking about like in the next section, there's a conversation about, you know, the development of policy and things like that. So this was my bad because I was traveling this weekend and sick last week, but I don't see the subcommittee as an or to the auditor, otherwise not existing. I think that there is a utility for it that is broader than this particular point.
And this task force is the same as the one we're talking about above, right? So we're talking about one Takoma Park Public Safety Task Force, and it's possible that that task force has a subcommittee that could specifically look at some of the things that would be coming out of the auditing function. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't in some ways writing this so that we were limiting the the committee function, the Public Safety Task Force function.
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Any questions as I scroll through this very well footnoted recommendation here? And then here, this was the part about the Dixon incident. And what do we want to do with that? Is there some thoughts on that based on what we've heard? Do we want to say the auditor would look at things like, or that the auditor would also look at, Jumana?
I'm sorry, before we get to that function, and again, this was sort of a late back and forth on our listserv, the part about the auditor or auditors participating in the creation of policies, having the authority to make resolutions, like I think that was one for me that shouldn't be limited to an auditor function, but that there needs to be transparency on these things to the larger community and input on policy, right? So whether it comes through the subcommittee or some other form, to me, that's not limited to an auditor function. Like I think an auditor can have a place in that, but I think that kind of transparency on all these various types of policies, including, you know, policies on use of tech, policies on use of force, policies on, you know, people with different abilities, that's a public input conversation from my perspective and not just an auditor conversation.
Yep. And what I'm thinking as we think through kind of how to organize these so they make a little bit more rational sense, like starting with the establishment or continuation of the Public Safety Task Force becomes a nice catch-all for a lot of different things that we're talking about later. And so we can refer back to that and some of these other recommendations, that these are the types of things that would be looked at by the establishment of the ongoing task force. Am I getting that correct, everybody? Okay. Please let me know if I'm not so that we can update it. Thanks, Jumana. Dixon incident, how specific is the question? Do we want to be on this? Kiminori?
Yeah, I just agree that probably just auditor should not be sort of like isolated, another black box here, right?
Right.
So I think we need to still figure it out, or we can leave that open. But how that auditor or subcommittee structure is, part of the task force that's open and transparent. So make sure that it's not we just create another black box there.
Absolutely. thoughts on the Dixon incident and what we need to include here. So currently it's got a couple bullets in here about that. The recommendation was either we say the auditor and the task force can look at incidences like, or we can say specifically review the findings of this one. I just want to make sure I'm capturing it correctly. It does seem more specific than others in here, but it does sound like there's some rationale behind that. So I just need some guidance on what folks are thinking on this one.
If I can just say, if it's before July of 2022, there are going to be some limitations on what an auditor could even do, because we are currently still under the current LEOBR and the current MPIA. So just keep that in mind, because this is going to come way before that time frame. So for that particular incident, there are limits what an outside person could do, if that makes any sense.
Got it. Adam, I see you're
I
up.
think
Go ahead.
the MPIA changes take place in October, I believe. Is that right? Of this year, they come quite a bit before the LEOBR.
Yeah, you're correct. October for the MPIA, July of 22 for the LEOBR, but more of the LEOBR for this implication. And I don't know that it's going to come before October, but I'm going to be more concerned about the implications of the LEOBR in this particular case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're necessarily envisioning the auditors, reviewing this for disciplinary reasons. I think it's more a matter of just something missed in the 2020 incident that we could make some recommendations for best practices going forward, just to make sure that something like that isn't missed again. But I think we're sensitive to what can be shared under the current laws, but also given that there's an ongoing criminal case. But the point being, when the time is right, we want to make sure that someone takes a look at that. So I think the intro language can be, among the specific incidents that the auditor would review, would be this. And then between now and Thursday, our subcommittee can massage it a little bit, just to acknowledge the fact that there is this internal audit, and we would expect that the auditor person or subcommittee would evaluate that in the course of taking a look at this 2020 incident.
Got it. Adam, I'm putting your name here just so I can keep track of which committee I'm getting this from, but clearly we'll look to your committee on updated language there, and updated as among the specific incidences, and we'll get the updated language there. Okay, I'm going to keep scrolling here. Please tell me to stop, but okay, we're going to go into this section, which we talked about, kind of new departments and functions. This one has gotten substantially cleaner since we first had our discussion. I think there's been a lot of coalescing around. There are a couple different functions we're looking for here. They're generally called different things. We just want to make sure we have them in the right place. So this one here says, establish a neighborhood services division in Takoma Park government that is separate from the police department. That was simply a word change. It used to say that lives outside of. So this just says that is separate from the police department. Responsible for functions such as parking violations, speed camera monitoring, red light camera operation, crossing guards, and code enforcement. So this one here said, go ahead, Jumana.
Initially, at least I know it was in several different places, but when we wrote it up, we had the victims advocate position in there too.
Yep. Yep, go ahead.
I just don't know if it went somewhere else.
It is in here in a different section, and it says explore if I think it says recommend or explore that the victim's advocate should be a part of. And I think as it's currently written, it says either neighborhood services or community assistance office. So that one's in here. I'm going to make a note to make sure we talk about when I get to it if it should move up here, but it didn't get lost. It's just in a different section. So let me make a note around that. There was a question here on whether or not, so we put code enforcement here, and Kim Inori said, are there other things that should be included in this type of office? Peeling paint, overgrown shrubbery, etc. Like how specific do we want to be, or do we want to leave it a little bit more broadly? And then I'll get to the hand in just one second. If you go down, the other office that was talked about was this community assistance office and community safety team. That seemed to be the one that was more focused on mental health emergencies, social services, human services, etc. Go ahead, Jide.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that the goals or what have you have a metric for measuring success, and then also quantify whether or not it's an issue in Takoma Park presently, or if it seeks to remedy, something potentially.
Yep. Let's start there, G-Day, with this goal. So the goal says move non-policing functions and functions that are not tied to a violation of the criminal code outside of the police department. So what it seems like this needs to kind of fit with what you just said is kind of the why, because doing so will, or because we're solving for. Can anyone kind of help me flesh this one out a little bit more?
So I can take that on. I can come up with some language to put in, but more or less the idea is that historically over time, as we've seen in several large metropolitan areas throughout the country, which I acknowledge Takoma Park is not one of them, but I think the same concerns apply. Broken windows policing, that is the over policing in Black and brown communities of minor violations related to code enforcement, have been a way to over criminalize certain communities. I think that's sort of the larger answer. I think the long-term answer just fundamentally is that although as we've talked about throughout the course of this task force, there are a number of things that either the state, which I know we have limited control over, which you've talked about several times, or other government bodies have criminalized because at some point somebody thought it was a good idea to make it a crime, are not proper uses of the criminal justice system, because the response and involvement of the criminal justice system is disproportionate to the impact that it has on the individual, given the severity or lack thereof of the supposed crime involved. So those are the overarching concerns. I think it's one about broken policing, and then second, it's just a overall sort of philosophical question about when do we want to involve the criminal justice system in things that have long-term consequences on individuals who are pulled into it.
I'm going to go Jumana and then Christina.
From my perspective, I think it's also though how we're communicating to the community what these things are. And I had given the example before where I've seen one of my neighbors threaten to call, threaten in a really menacing way. So we're going to call the police on you because your dog won't stop barking. And there's laws against that. And I fully understand that it's not an armed police officer that's coming to that event, but the kind of anxiety that can be raised in people by those kinds of threats, by having, somebody who even looks like law enforcement show up to their house versus a different kind of model. Because this was part of it for me, right? When it comes to things like code enforcement, that rather than saying, here's a ticket, if you don't cut your grass by this date, we're going to fine you, say, we notice your grass isn't cut. We notice X, Y, and Z is happening. Do you need assistance with? Right. And so I think that was also part of it, shifting the function to one that is less, I don't know what's the right word I'm looking for, like less, it's not penal, right? But like less of a consequence driven model and more of an assistance driven model.
Thank you, Jumana. Christina?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was all turned off. So I was just going to add to Jumana's comment that in one of the early listening sessions, a couple of people talked about needing support, but not needing police. One gentleman mentioned his daughter who had mental health challenges and substance abuse issues. That's one that stands out in my mind. And so the idea is that there is so much, to Jumana's point, that the police are sort of named as like the solver for everything, but that actually for public safety, it seems like there's very specific things for police, and then that there's other concerns and needs. And so that's what's here. So to Jide's question, like 7 minutes ago, I think that this is one of the goals that's more national than, I see its need in our community, but I think it also comes from like the bigger question around public safety that we're having nationally.
Thank you, Christina. Michael?
I'll try to be really brief. I mean, I agree with some of what's been said, but I think from my perspective, especially for the not only the neighborhood services, but the whatever the other office was, I think we ask police officers to do too many things. And if we can just let them focus on what they should be doing, where an armed officer should respond and not have to manage all these other functions would be a positive. And I think that's definitely true when it comes to mental health and other things. I mean, we've talked about that extensively. So I think that's a piece of it. And then figuring out how ways we can provide assistance to people who need assistance, but have police response where we need police response. I think that's really just would be my take on it. So.
Got it. Thank you. And I saw Mayor Kate in the chat said less about enforcement and more about assistance. Chief, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify something. A lot of these departments or a lot of these organizations that fall within the police department are not armed police officers. So removing them to a different section is not necessarily going to change what they are. I'm all about discussing and talking about changing the function of what they do. When we talk about neighborhood services, or excuse me, code enforcement being more of a support and less of an enforcement type. But our crossing guards don't wear weapons. Our neighborhood services staff don't wear weapons. Our dispatchers don't wear weapons. So all of these entities, if you move them outside the police department, they're essentially still going to do the same functions. I agree fully with transferring some of the non-police calls away from police, whether they be mental health, whether they be what have you. But I think we just, if you're moving something just to move something, I don't know that it necessarily needs to come out of policing. Like our crossing guards, what is the justification to move our crossing guards out of policing? What is, so those are the questions I think we need to discuss, because is it moving it out of the police department, or is it improving the service that they supply, whether the police department or outside of? So I just want to, the main thing clarification I want to make is we don't send police officers to these calls that are being made.
Thank you. Councilmember Searcy and then Jumana.
Thank you all so much. I apologize for being late, and this has been a great discussion. I do want to kind of pick up where the chief dropped off, and it sounds like, and I see in the chat that, less about enforcement and more about assistance. So if what you all are proposing, for example, with code enforcement, I can say from my experience, typically when someone is at the point where they can't do certain exterior work on their property, or they're not cutting the grass, that's usually indicative of other things. Or other, challenges that family or that household may be having. So if there are some aspects of recommendation that you all are making here that is designed to help facilitate coordination. So, making sure that instead of it just being about code enforcement, it's about really connecting folks who may be experiencing financial hardship to our office that actually does housing and community development to see if they may be eligible for external assistance. That might be helpful. So as you all are kind of, fleshing out the goal for some of these, it would be helpful if you all could kind of spell some of that out a little bit. And I think some of these categories, the rationale for movement may vary, or the issue that the move will solve or is trying to solve might vary. So any insights that you all have on that would be really helpful.
Thank you, council member. Did I miss anyone's hands? So what I'm hearing, Jumana, go ahead.
Sorry, I just took it down when you called my name, so I didn't.
Sorry, go ahead.
So if it's okay, I'd like to ask Chief Duvall, I guess I would want to turn the question around and ask sort of what is the purpose, or what is the need to have something like the crossing guards under the police department versus any other part of government? Is there anything that is gained by that? Because you're sort of asking, do you move just to move, but do you place just to place, I guess would be the opposite question. So what is the need to have crossing guards in the police department when, as far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they don't actually have a law enforcement function, but they help our kids get to school safely?
I mean, that's a good question. And I'll touch on the ones that I do really think are valuable in the police department. That's our victim witness coordinator. They work directly with our detectives and our patrol staff. And I think that's a critical component that needs to be in the police department. Same token, I think the dispatchers should be within the police department. They're the lifeline for the police officers. They have regular communication. Having them in the building is essential. Crossing guards, it's not a matter of should they be in police, should they be in housing. The question is why move them out of police if they're already housed here, and it seems to work for the past 100 years since we've had crossing guards. That would be my question. I think that you talk about all of these entities, and I think they need to be evaluated on their own value to the police department, and their own value of being intertwined with the police department. I'm not saying that everyone should be in the police department, but what my question is, they're here now. Why do we want to move them out? What is the adverse effect to our community by having crossing guards in the police department? That's my main question is I don't know that there's a problem that we're solving by moving crossing guards out of the police department.
Jumana, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I guess, a couple of things about that. As far as crossing guards, like if there is no articulable reason to leave them in the police department, I would still advocate moving them because it's about focusing policing functions on actual law enforcement functions. When it comes to questions of the victim's advocate, I don't know if it's a victim's advocate or just a coordinator for the police, but in my experience, a victim's advocate, if you're going to be an advocate for the victim's interests do not always align with law enforcement's interests. And I know that having served as a victim's advocate in the past, right, which is, especially if you're talking about sexual assault survivors, victims of domestic violence, there are people who don't want to engage law enforcement. They don't want to prosecute, they don't want to participate, but they're looking for some kind of in-between step or some kind of in-between assistance. And so that's where, in my mind, if it's a victim's advocate versus a coordinator of some sort, which maybe is different, that person doesn't belong in the police department because if you're advocating for the victim, those interests are not always aligned. They just aren't. And so maybe it's a question of definitionally what that is. But as far as the crossing guards, I still don't understand the rationale for leaving them there just because they've been there. There's a lot of things that have just been the way they've been, but that to me is not an argument for leaving them, the way they've been.
Thank you all for that. These will remain the task force recommendations. So this back and forth is very, very helpful for clarity. What I'm hearing is that the intent here is to take things that aren't critical to law enforcement and put them in a different spot. I welcome all sorts of feedback on what that looks like and if we have the right language or not. But I think that's what I'm hearing here, and I'm seeing some additional recommendations on how the goal is framed. I'm going to toss to G-Day. I want to put in people's mind what I'm not clear on, and it's maybe just on me. Is there a specific reason we think a neighborhood services division is separate and apart from a community assistance office and community safety team? Are those two separate functions for very specific reasons, or they could be all part of one office, or they could have a reporting relationship between the two? Not looking for us to draw an org chart. I just want to make sure if it is intently two different offices, we're saying why. And if it's not, we're saying here are the types of functions and they could be organized a few different ways. So help me with that. G-Day.
Yeah, I just had my follow on, which is how are we measuring the success? I just want to make sure that whatever task force or whoever it is that evaluates whether or not our recommendations bore fruit has a way of tracking whether or not, whether or not anything actually resulted from any change that's being made or proposed.
Yep. And G-Day, I want to make sure I'm not skipping over that because you mentioned it a couple different times. Are you seeing that as some clarity basically under each goal or recommendation that we say this would be the metrics by which this was judged, or would that be its own section that says these are the best recommendations we have at this point in the process? It is important to measure if these are working or not, and here's how we recommend doing that.
Well, I mean, I think effectively, if we're going to have a goal for each recommendation or what have you, that we should probably in that same kind of section say how it is we're going to measure its success, if that's possible. In some of these instances, it may not be possible, but it would be good to know what success looks like.
Got it. So as we're going through this, folks, just think through if there's a metric that fits with these so that we can start getting them down. And if there's not, we can write some language that, we're not sure how to measure this one, but what we're trying to solve for is X, Y, and Z. Jessica.
Yes. So in addition to the success metrics, I think, I hear different task force members saying as we go through these, you're talking about the different sources that you're using to develop these. So some of you have said, oh, we heard a focus group member talk about that, or, we interviewed this person, Christy Lopez was our source for this. So I just wanted to note that I know that we've been adding citations in certain places in the document, but for city staff, as we work to unpack and implement these, and I think for whatever next group that we form to continue the work that you all have started, it'll be easier for them to pick up if we know kind of what these are based on, or kind of what the sources are. So with this one, was this, maybe you saw this work in another city, but so I guess below success metric, I would put kind of source or model, or what your what it was based on, kind of what is the gold standard, or what was your source when you developed this particular recommendation. All of that will be really helpful in the future as we try to build on these.
Got it, Jessica. And some groups have done a really great job of saying this is related to this article or this piece of information. So if anyone has that, let us know. In the meantime, we're capturing it as we're hearing it, so it can be in the updated drafts of this. I don't want us to get stuck on this section. I think we've actually clarified it quite a bit. I do want to go back to the question I asked. I saw Adam dropped an answer in. Do we see Neighborhood Services Division and Community Assistance Office as separate and distinct things, or they're functions that we don't think should live within law enforcement? We think they should live separately, but what separately looks like is something we can work on as the task force continues. I'm seeing Jide and Adam both saying we should combine them into a recommendation. Anyone disagree with that? Perfect.
I'm sorry, what is the question? Combining
so right
how?
here, no, we're saying we need a Neighborhood Services Division, and then we're separately saying we need a Community Assistance Office and Community Safety Team. Are we really asking for different offices and different functions, or are these the things that need to be accomplished, and how they're organized we haven't fully figured out yet? Does that make sense?
Sure, I guess it's the latter. I mean, I think certainly the Community Safety Team could sit within a Neighborhood Services Division. I think we've said that earlier. I'm interested if Ajmal has different thoughts, but I believe we said that the Community Safety Team, again, doesn't have to be its own division. It could be within a Neighborhood Services Division. I think we're
assist individuals who need help alleviating what would be code problems. That seems very similar to some of the social service function of the community assistant officers who'd respond to neighbor relations. So I think that given that helpful clarification, I think it's fine to combine.
Okay. Perfect. There were some questions asked here, which you can all see, about some of these needing a bit more specificity, or just to make sure we had them correct. So it says like this office should deal with mental health, emergencies, neighborhood relations, social services. This one says, how would that work? What does deal with mean? Is there more specificity there? And then there were questions around the dispatch and the 24/7 model here, which get into some of our other dispatch questions as well. I'm thinking that as we combine these into one, it actually helps with this a little bit, because we're listing out the types of issues that this function would focus on. But is there any additional detail? I know Kiminori, you asked a few questions about this section, so I want to make sure we're adding any specificity that's needed. Kiminori, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that neighborhood services and code enforcement, I made a comment about, more like providing resources to correct those violations. So I think that fits with the name Community Assistance Office. So I'm for combining those. Now, I think this, how to deal with mental health crisis and issues and services and referral, I think that's the big issue here, I think. So if you can flesh out like, what it looks like, right? Like how does it work? If you're a family member, I think there is someone from the community listening session, right? There's the daughter going through crisis, substance abuse, mental health issue, how does it work when they call, emergency like 911 or non-emergency number? Who picks up, what kind of services do they get? I think just the dealing with these issues and this, this office kind of catch-all office would do all of this. For me, it seems like not specific enough, since that's a major issue. Like I think we're trying to address.
So one of the ways to address this, and I welcome thoughts, especially in the folks who drafted this content, would be to really lean into defining what we're trying to solve for around mental health in the goals section, and then kind of referring some of the details of what that'll look like to the ongoing work of the creation of this office, et cetera. We know it's important. We know, my guess would be the chief would agree with this, that we need some resources around mental health response that are not policing resources. We think that is a strong recommendation of our collective group. And we think it could also fit somewhat in a neighborhood services office or a community safety team. If we kind of spell out the thinking behind that, does that get us closer to some specificity that makes this helpful? Anyone?
So
can I jump in?
No, go ahead, Adam.
No, I think we're probably pretty clear on the goal, right? I think that most of us agree that the goal is to not have armed police officers respond to these types of calls where people are in mental health crisis and they don't have the professional training. Even if they've got some course in the academy on it, that they're just one of the best people to deal with it. I took Kim and Ori's point to be more that there's the devil's in the details here. There's going to be a lot that the city is going to want to know about how exactly is this going to play out, and how will this team respond, and when will it be available. So I might be misstating what the concern was, but I think it's less about the goal and more about how it's going to be implemented.
I mean, what if we used language that was like, the office shall be primarily responsible for responding to requests for mental health services, neighbor relations, social services, or where, and look, I'm just making this up to totally, push back, or where the dispatcher, based on their training, strongly believes that the request is one related to mental health, neighbor relations, or social services. So there's a component there where either the individual is asking explicitly for things that are within the ambit of the new non-police body, or based on their training, is in one of the many examples that Jimana pointed out that was really helpful, or that community members pointed out, where the dispatcher, based on their training, can tell that this is a situation where there's a good chance that it's not a serious crime, but either a neighbor relations problem or a mental health emergency. This office shall be primarily responsible for responding to it. Now, that doesn't mean that, as others have pointed out, if the situation becomes dangerous, these officers could not work with the police department, but they shall be primarily responsible. I think the question is whether or not that gives enough detail, based on Kim and Ori's thoughts, or whether or not the council would want us to spell that out further in terms of what we think primarily responsible means.
I think that provides more clarity than is here currently. So
broad. So I'm a little uncomfortable with that term. I know when we talked about it, the things I was thinking about were, response to mental health crisis and maybe referral, where it's needed, and domestic violence extraction where appropriate, addiction, service referral, that type of thing. Because right now, Takoma Park doesn't really have a Department of Social Services. I mean, if you need, certain types of assistance, you have to go to the county. I don't think that's going to change. necessarily, because that's a fair amount of overhead to create that and cost. So I think we want to be as specific as we can, on some of these things. It's not just generic social services. I think people should know how to refer for them, but many of those referrals are going to go to the county. They're not going to go to Takoma Park.
Is that closer, Michael?
Yeah, I think so.
Kiminori?
Yeah, I definitely, the primary goal is to sort of, remove armed officers from this type of calls, unless it's somehow needed, the situation called for. But are we trying to do beyond that? Like, are citizens satisfied with sort of mental health, services or referrals or things of that nature that they're getting now? Because I assume that, many times the police officers respond and they do take those people to, ER, hospitals, or, other services right now, whether that's county or city, I just don't know. I'm just trying to understand like how far this will go after removing, the possibility that the officers are involved.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say having a trained person could completely change the dynamic. I mean, someone who's trained to, de-escalate a situation, try to really assess what's needed, may not have to take somebody to an emergency room or to a psychiatric unit in a hospital. So I think that, having the right people respond to certain situations will give more appropriate referral to services than you would get just from having a catch-all 911 response where, I mean, you get what you get. It's not, I mean, I'm sure people are doing the best that they can, but I think that, if it gets back to that assistance model, trying to provide the right level of service to residents, I think having better trained people for specific types of situations is what we want to accomplish here.
Thank you, Michael. I got Jide and then Emil.
So I guess two things. One, I'm the domestic violence extraction thing. I don't necessarily know a lot about domestic violence, but I'm not terribly comfortable with the idea of sending people that aren't the police to help extract folks. But like I said, I freely admit I don't know. Maybe the situations are mundane, but it seems like it would be in the victim's interest or what have you to have a police officer. I guess the other thing is, and maybe this is kind of a question for Chief Duvall about the kind of calls for service that they get now related to mental health. Do they frequently involve people going to the emergency room? And then I guess my other question would be, I'm assuming that you guys aren't necessarily bound by HIPAA or anything like that. So do you guys are free to actually, like, if there are repeated case offenders or what have you, you have a database potentially of people that may have mental health issues, and so it impacts how you respond to calls. Is that right?
So Chief, we'll toss that to you. The first question was about domestic violence extraction. The second was how are mental health calls generally handled now, where are folks referred to, and if you have a record of people needing those services in a routine way, do you have a way of knowing that? You're on mute. You're on mute, Chief.
Thank you. I'll answer the first question, or the last question first. We do keep a database. It's very helpful for us for situational awareness when we respond to residences to know that someone at the residence is in mental crisis. It really assists us so we know that we're responding, how to handle it, and so on and so forth. I can get you the number of people that we actually take in for mental evaluation. A lot of the mental evaluations are voluntary. Very few are involuntary. The involuntary ones involve violence, the threat to themselves or others. I think what we really need to focus on, and I've always said I'm a huge proponent of having the mental health counselors, but we do have the template already here in the county with the crisis intervention counselors. I would have really liked to seen a higher budget appropriation for more counselors within the county. Those counselors would service Takoma Park. So I think when you're looking at this, look at what is already there, and the crisis counselors are already there. So any recommendations should absolutely ask for the city to support funding for additional mental health counselors, because they can be extremely valuable, not only in responding to calls for service, but also being reactive and making sure that people are on their meds, making sure that people are following up with doctor visits and following up with families. So, I think this is something, if there's anything in the recommendations that I support and I really want to see move forward, is this mental health component. So I think that getting this right is a critical thing that we need to do. But I think there's several things that we can do, and some of the suggestions are spot on. But I do think we need to lean on the resources that we do have already existing here in Montgomery County.
And I want to get to Michael and Emil, but there was a question around domestic violence extraction and the kind of the policing needs around that versus the non-policing needs around that.
One of the most violent encounters police officers have is in domestic situations. Domestic situations can turn from 0 to 30 in a second. So, I think that there is an absolute need to have that counseling component within these family disputes that it's just not in existence right now. But there are some calls, especially domestic violence calls, that are violent in nature that police have to respond to. We are required by law when we respond out to these, some of these situations, if they're visible injuries on either party, to make an arrest. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts, but I think the most important thing that I think in this is right now there are no resources to mediate domestic violence issues. There are no resources to what causes the domestic violence issue. So that, once again, looking at the root issue which causes it, so we don't have to respond to calls, is also critical. As far as removing a domestic partner from situations, I could get you the stats, but a lot of times, once again, to deflate the situation, a lot of times, partners voluntarily leave the house for an evening and so on and so forth. But what I'd like to see is getting to the root of what causes those domestics, and also having some type of resources for the people that are having the domestics.
Michael?
I was just going to clarify. I mean, what I was anticipating was situations where somebody wants to be, relocated to somewhere else when the partner is not in the residence. I wasn't anticipating a situation where violence was occurring. So, and I think that happens with relative frequency, although there's obviously you need police response when it's the former. So
the template we would use currently was to call the crisis center and have them come out and provide them assistance. If the crisis center is not working, obviously it resorts to the police officers, but we work directly with our housing departments. A lot of times we've gotten people in those type of situations, temporary hotels and so on and so forth. But I think it all goes back to having those counselors that could respond that in real time, not the police officer responds and has to call them out, if that makes any sense.
Michael, was there anything else you wanted to add? I saw your hand up before we had that back and forth, so I just want to make sure we got everything you needed out of that. You good?
No.
Okay, got it. This is in the document later, but domestic violence has come up 2 or 3 different times, and there've been a lot of requests for information. We actually don't have a recommendation in here that talks about that in great detail. It may fit here with the level of nuance we just talked about, but let's keep that on the radar to make sure that we're not ignoring what the recommendation needs to be around all of that. Emil?
Yeah, just very quickly for the second bullet, I can't see what comes later. Yeah, okay, so for the second bullet, can we just say train 911 dispatchers to refer mental health emergency and other non-police calls to this office? Because the community safety team was one of our subcommittee's recommendations. I think that emphasis was on what a lot of other people have talked about, not having armed officers respond to mental health emergencies where the individual is not violent.
Got it. I've added that here. Christina, I see your question, but go ahead.
So in discussing mental health in our quality of life committee, we also talked about homelessness, I feel like. And so I wonder if that needs to be, of the issues Michael listed that you just added, if you could go up a tiny bit. Yep. You said right there. So you said addiction service referral, domestic violence relocation when appropriate, referrals for social services. I wonder if you want to mention homelessness there. other quality of life people, I don't know if you feel strongly about that being included as one of the things.
Kim Inori had made a similar remark about 3 bullets down about where does this fit. Oftentimes many of these coexist, homeless individuals who suffer from mental illness and substance abuse. So I think there's a lot of agreement around that. Perfect. Dwayne says he agrees here as well. Anything we're missing from this type of list? I personally think these types of things are incredibly helpful because the council specific type of way. Anything we're missing from that list? Kim Inori?
Yeah, this is kind of question, like follow-up question to Chief Deval, but are you suggesting more funding to the county crisis counselors, or you're saying like funding like some local crisis counselors that could be part of this community safety team or community assistance office?
Actually, both. We have the ARPA funds available to us, and we're looking at a pilot program within the city of Takoma Park to have our own crisis intervention counselors kind of embedded with the current crisis intervention model at the county level, but also to provide response in caseload management to our residents here in the city of Takoma Park. So I think I would say both. I think it's really important if we can get the funding for the pilot program to have the counselors here embedded within the city of Takoma Park, we can get a really good idea of what the model would look like. Whether or not we continue that on a Takoma Park specific level embedded with resources through the county, or do we recommend that the county has more resources? I'd like to see both. I think we are so understaffed with all of these issues. And if I can just echo what Christina said, the homelessness issue is also so prevalent, especially with our people in mental health crisis. So if you're asking me what I would advocate for, it would be for both.
Yeah, and especially I guess like you mentioned, like outreach and more proactive activities to check in with some of those people who had mental health crisis in the past. The local assistance and local resources probably make more sense.
Perfect. I'm going to keep scrolling just to make sure we don't get crammed at the end of the meeting here. This one said, in practice, this is important. This was the idea about if there are enough calls of service, there should be a 24/7 model, but possibly it starts as a pilot program to see if there are enough calls for service. I just want to make sure that that's what's being recommended here, and if we're all okay with that. Okay. This was just aligning some of the language. Go ahead, Kim Inori.
Yeah, the reason why I raise this is, there's so many models out there, right? So if it's not like, standalone, like 24/7 line for, behavioral health crisis, we also need to start thinking about, training officers for, crisis intervention, like a CIT model, or more co-responder model where, maybe after hours, officers are the one that have to respond to those crises. So, they can go with counselors or clinicians. There are many models depending on sort of the volume and, our preference, I guess. So.
Thank you, Kim Inori. Chief, I see your hand.
I just wanted to clarify something. If there's part of it is, yes, having mental health counselors to respond to calls, but there are going to be calls that officers just stumble upon, or the crisis intervention counselors aren't available. So we understand the need for our staff to have that enhanced crisis de-escalation training. So all of our officers, 100% have been trained in de-escalation training, enhanced de-escalation training. And about 90% of our officers, only the newer officers, have not been trained on enhanced crisis intervention. How do you deal with people? How do you de-escalate? How do you notice signs of agitation? All of those things that are critically important. So when we talk about doing this, we can't forget the training that's also needed for police in responding to these calls. Because like I said, there are going to be occasions where it's going to be a police officer that is handling this call. At the very least, maybe until a mental health, technician can come out and take over.
So Kim Minori, I want to make sure I'm capturing this correctly. So the idea is we want this to be a standalone function. In a perfect world, that is a 24/7 function where you're dispatching a community safety team. What you're asking, what I think the chief was just responding to, is there will still be situations where police are dispatched and it turns out to be this type of issue, or there's a police response if this isn't a 24/7 function ultimately. Do we also want to include a recommendation around the level of training for officers in that situation? Is that what you're asking for? Is like, do we want to have an and or an or I just want to make sure I'm capturing it correctly.
Yeah, my idea was that if the 24/7 standalone thing is not sustainable for volume or whatever other reasons, then we want to make sure that officers get the CIT training and maybe certified, or that co-responder model where officers respond to these crisis calls with clinicians or social service social workers or things like that.
Got
So
it.
make sure that crisis can happen anytime, and you get the sort of best, most appropriate service anytime the call happens.
Jumana?
Yeah, so apologies if there's noise in the background. But so this is maybe a question for the chief or like a model that I've seen, but part of the question is if this can't be a 24/7 service, with the understanding that there's the training that every officer undergoes, is there, or could there be a model of having, and maybe this only works in bigger departments, so I'll hold that, but could there be a model of having some specific officers who have deeper training that are, available on any given shift? And I asked that because, going back to when I was a victims advocate, there was specific officers who were trained to respond to sexual assault. So you knew that if there was a sexual assault call, you already knew who they were. One of them was responding. They had deeper training. They knew sort of the ins and outs of what happens at the hospital, what happens at every piece. And it was a much more workable method. So I don't know if that's a possibility, right? To have a couple of officers, like to have some subset of the officers who have deeper training in some of these things that can be dispatched in the moments where there isn't an alternative or something like that.
That's a really good point. And that was the model we originally had. The training I'm referring to is the enhanced training that we would expect. So originally we had at least one officer, and we wanted sometimes two officers on every shift that were trained in this enhanced crisis intervention training. And that was the kind of a model across the county. What we did is we took it a step further, and instead of just having a few officers that were trained in this advanced training, we took it to the next level, and we want every officer to have that training. Because if that officer is on leave or in training, we want to make sure that everyone has that training. So I think it probably would be helpful for me to give an overview of kind of that enhanced training that our officers go through. But like I said, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, we only had a scattering of people that had this enhanced training that would allow them to focus on those calls. So we would call over the radio, do you have a crisis intervention trained officer available? Now, what I'm saying is 90% of our officers have that enhanced training. So any officer you get is not going to have to call someone else. So that's the model we were able to do because we're smaller, where the county police with 1,300 officers could not do that. So that's why I feel very confident that our officers handle stuff really well. And that training is really, really valuable. I sat through the training myself. It's engaging, and it causes you to really reflect on certain things and de-escalate. And I think the most important thing is a lot of times we as officers, through our traditional training, escalate issues. So instead of stepping back and de-escalating, our body language and or our position of whether it be vehicles, whether it's lights on, whether it's number of officers, all of that escalates things. So if you're asking me, yes, we have that model here, but we've even enhanced that model to the fact that we're trying to have every officer with that enhanced training, if that makes any sense.
So what I'm hearing here is primary goal is non-police response for issues that do not require a police response. That's the primary goal. Here's the office, here's the function, here's what that looks like. Also an understanding that often police will respond in those situations, or there is a chance that a 24/7 model doesn't become sustainable. In both of those cases, continuing investment in enhanced or specialized training models for police officers is an important part of making sure we're responding appropriately. Am I generally capturing the sentiment of the group around this? Go ahead, Kiminori.
I would put the co-responder model a little above, officers training, CIT, just so that, they get the sort of different input when things.
Really important stuff. This was just adding some clarity about what we meant when we said this office. So all is good there. Kiminori, this is where we talked about homeless services, et cetera, which we've talked about. There was a recommendation. The team will have the ability to refer disputes to a conflict resolution team. There are a couple of questions about what is this? We don't really seem to talk about what this is. We just say that we can refer to it. Is this a specific team, or is this the idea that we also need to be investing in conflict resolution and mediation, which was added as well? Anyone have a thought on that? Go ahead, Dwayne.
Yeah, so that was something that our team brought up brought to the table to try to address perhaps what the community safety team may encounter with respect to ongoing or a dispute that could be ongoing. So the idea was to be able to have the ability to take the dispute and refer to someone, a mediation team, preferably, that could address and help resolve any ongoing issues that came about as a result of the interaction with the community safety team. So, for example, if there was something that definitely did not need any such thing as a police officer becoming involved, but needed someone to come out and after the initial contact, say, look, we have I know of, or we have a mediation team that could help resolve this conflict. Because this one-time interaction, this one-time contact is not necessarily going to resolve the issue. So would both parties be amenable to having someone come out and talk through this issue? So that's where that particular and eventually resolve it. So that's where that conflict resolution team suggestion came in.
Got it. Christina said in the chat, what if we remove the word team and just talked about referring it to conflict resolution? Does that help at all? Kiminori and then Mayor Kate. Go ahead, Kiminori.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand, but I added the link about, I guess, the community mediation service that's actually located in the city of Takoma Park. So there may be, these resources that exist already that we may be able to
Looks
do.
like, Mayor Kate, not to speak for you, but it looks like that's what you're saying in the chat, is that we have.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I don't want to discourage taking something out. We do this already in this, so.
Right. I think the idea was to just ensure that this particular body that we're proposing has the ability to also, I mean, it's good to know that there's a conflict resolution service available and it's based in Takoma Park. That's great to hear. I would suggest that it stay in here as a option for that team to be able to say we have, because I don't think a lot of people may know that mediation service is there and available for use by Takoma Park residents. So if that could maybe continue to stay in as a way of ensuring that moving forward, that is an option that is used to resolve conflicts in our city.
Yeah, and that's what I meant, Dwayne. I didn't want to discourage. I just wanted to let folks know that we use the mediation center. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome that it's there, and I appreciate you raising that. Thanks.
Got it. I've noted that here. Refer disputes to mediation center and conflict resolution services. This next one comes up a couple times below too. Maybe drop a footnote. Absolutely. I will drop that footnote in. funding for the staffing of these new positions shall be taken from funding for the staffing of police officials who are generally responsible for responding to assistance. Couple comments here. I'm not terribly fond of pulling funding from police for the creation of a group when ARPA funds may be available. We should be evaluating and testing it before just pulling funding. And then a response that said, I concur. So would love to talk about how specific we want to be on this needs to be funded versus this needs to be funded from, and what's the real intent here to make sure it reflects the goal. So welcome thoughts on that one. And the second part of this down here, I think it's related to the same one. Yeah, who are generally responsible for responding. The other one was, it sounds a little too simplistic, and whether or not it's as easy as saying the officers who are no longer responding over here, we can repurpose some of the funding for over here. Do we want to get to that level of specificity? And if so, let's talk through that. And if not, let's figure out how we want to state this one.
Michael, for clarification with me, are they talking about officials meaning command staff? Are they talking about, what are they referring to? The people that run the police department? Are they, I'm not sure what police officials mean. Can someone clarify what exactly that means?
Cops, I think. Police officials is just a cop term for like a supervisor, but I don't think that's what we were getting at. I think the general idea is that we're just freeing up funds if officers aren't needed, and my point was just echoing what Jide said, which is that we don't really know how much these new services are going to free up resources, and if cops are just twiddling their thumbs and we can trim in response to that, then we should do so. I just think, given that we have some flexibility with the funding, we should wait to see how much this lightens the load that the police department carries before we just cutting.
One thing I'll throw out, and tell me if I'm completely off base on this, but I remember Councilmember Searcy saying we want to make sure out of this we know what we should be trying to use some ARPA funds for pretty quickly. What if there was a recommendation around, we consider this a primary candidate for increased funding through the ARPA funds that Takoma Park may get, and then more long-term, we should look at whether budgetary resources are freed up in a way that could fund this by reallocation. That might be one way of threading that needle, but we'll go Ajmel and Christina.
No, just what you just said. I was just putting in a comment, maybe add language, indicate that at the end of the first year, review the impact of the new department and whether adjustments to the police budget are appropriate.
Perfect. Christina, and then Michael, and then Emil.
I was just gonna say that I want there to be some tracking of like budget surplus or whatever happens because if it's ARPA money, then after a certain amount of time, it's gonna disappear. So I do think that, to Ajmal's point, like we want to somehow list that we're monitoring like where the excesses lie, if there's changes or whatever.
Yep. So that we're not reliant on a temporary source of funding, basically. Got it. Michael Rubin, and then Emil.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been mostly covered, but I was just going to say, I mean, I think ARPA should cover the pilot programs, and I think future decisions about like long-term funding should be recommended by our, those who come after us, because I think it would be difficult to say. I think we need to see the results of the pilot and figure out what the impacts have been both on those offices that were created as well as on police that may have reduced demand or may not. So that needs to be looked at.
Got it. And so I'm adding what you just said here. So these things would be looked at by kind of the next iteration of this body as we're moving forward. Emil?
Yeah, I think Ajmal suggested language about reviewing the impact and determining whether adjustments to the police budget are appropriate. That seems good. I don't know about a specific reference to ARPA funds. As Christina said, those are temporary. I guess I'm trying to understand now, is this all a pilot, kind of the community safety team a pilot, or is just the phone line a pilot? So what
everything we're now combining under this new department / function is the recommendation around organizational structure. And then the 24/7 version of it was some of what we were talking about needing to try to see if that's sustainable.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that just it was the 24/7 version that was the pilot, not everything. So if the neighborhood services division with the community safety team, if that's not a pilot, but that's something ongoing, then I'm not sure that I would identify or specifically identify this as a priority use for ARPA funds, because ARPA funds, as Christina noted, are temporary, and we don't want a situation in which we're doing all this reorganization and then in 2 years there's no funding and people say, well, this all has to go back to the police department, or we have to end the community safety team. So again, I wouldn't say ARPA funds to start. If the council determines that this, as part of the long-term funding, some percentage would begin with, you would jump start it with ARPA funds with a clear plan for ongoing funding after that, that is fine. I don't know that we need to recommend that.
Councilmember Searcy, I'm not confident that you're in a place where you can jump in, but some of the ARPA funding stuff came from, be clear on what you think could be helpful here. Are we too in the weeds? Are we not in the weeds enough? Is there any guidance you want to provide around that would be helpful to the council?
So one of the things that is helpful, one is for you all to prioritize those recommendations that you think are the most critical, like the top tier things. It sounds like that there are some aspects of what we're talking about here in terms of the community safety team and the mental health professionals component that I do think we would need to pilot to see what structure it's in my mind, and you all may disagree. I think the infusion of mental health professionals and how that whole thing should work with the police department and other mental health services and how it may overlap with the county. I just think there's a lot that needs to be thought through before we can be in a place to be able to say definitively, this should be our organizational structure going forward as it pertains to mental health service delivery in the city, or this is the processes that we have in place. So if what the task force is saying is that, council, this is a priority recommendation that we think is critical for you all to figure out. We need mental health service. Use ARPA funds to flush out what model will be appropriate for the city. Again, I'm not trying to give you all wording. This is your baby, but that would be helpful from a council's perspective to know as we're having conversations around how to prioritize some of the early onset ARPA funds and what initiatives should get resources out the gate, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Michael?
It does, council members. So you're hearing, I think, loud and clear that the task force believes there's some merit to this neighborhood services division / community assistance office model. Within that, there's this community safety team for mental health response, et cetera. And what you're saying is, please tell us, yes, use some ARPA funds to flesh out that model and to pilot what can be piloted. And then what I'm hearing from the committee is, and then let's also bake in that there's going to be an ongoing evaluation of what's working, what's not, and is that shifting up resources elsewhere that can be dedicated to this in a non-ARPA way?
Right.
Am I hearing that? Go ahead.
And so I know that we've mentioned ARPA, but there are some things that are still, if you don't want to get that in the weeds in terms of dictating ARPA funds versus budget funds, it's enough for me to know that this is a priority recommendation for implementation for the council.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And we will figure out how to make it work.
Got it. Got it.
If I know that of all of however many recommendations that you all have, that this is a priority for us to go ahead and move on, and it's going to require some pilots in order to flush it out in terms of implementation, then that's helpful for us to know, and we can figure out the rest.
Got it. That is super helpful. Folks, I'm aware of the hour and I'm aware of how much time you're putting in. Let me scroll. I'm not going to rush because there's a lot here, but let me scroll through and see if there's some other stuff we can tick off pretty quickly here. That was the part that was always going to take the most discussion tonight. So we're actually making good progress here. There was a question here around the victims coordinator and advocate and whether that should be specifically in a department outside of the police department. Should it be with the community assistance office? Where should that be? You heard the chief earlier say that he felt there were some strong reasons for keeping it within the department. You heard some task force members, including Jumana, talking about why there could be an argument for that or parts of that function living outside of it. Do we want to do anything with this recommendation, or is it good where it is and what it looks like? And this is a naive question. Is there a difference between the functions of witness coordination and victims assistance? Are they combined because budgetarily that made sense, or is that one function? And do those functions fit in different places? Does witness coordination fit within policing, and does and then victims assistance fit within this community safety office? And apologies if that's a naive question, but are those separate functions that are just combined out of necessity currently? Or am I framing this completely incorrectly and we're good with the recommendation as it is?
Michael, are you asking me, or I'm not sure?
I'm asking, so Jumana referenced that they were separate to her. It seems like we talked to the victims coordinator and victims and witness coordinator. We talked to the person who played both of those roles. I think what I'm hearing is those might be slightly different roles, and should those functions be in slightly different places, but I don't want me to be hearing that wrong. Chief, are they the same kind of out of necessity? And are there parts of that role that could be done in slightly different functional areas, in your opinion?
It's a complicated question that can't be answered with a quick answer.
Okay, that's fair. That's completely fair. And everyone was very impressed with the woman who came and spoke to us. So I think this is coming from a place of how do we add resources in that general functional area. Jumana?
If I remember correctly, and anyone is free to tell me that I am incorrect on this, but I got a strong sense that the woman who came and spoke with us, I'm sorry, I forgot her name, needed more capacity, that it was sort of a lot to take on as one person. And so is it possible that there's a question of there needs to be more resource, this area needs to be more resourced, and maybe that's how you split the function? Like, you know, a witness coordinator that does whatever needs to be done for the police to make sure interviews happen where they're supposed to, or people are ready to participate in whatever kind of court proceeding or something. And then it's a separate function that actually, is a victim's advocate that says, these are the resources you need. This is what the process will look like. This is what you can do or not do. This is, it's just a different function.
Yeah.
To me.
So let me do this. I think we've noted the dichotomy, and that and we've heard from the chief, there's more nuance there. Let's follow up, Chief, if there's more nuance that can be provided around that to the task force between now and Thursday. Great. Task force, let's go back and remember the conversation we had with that individual and think through where this fits and if there's more nuance to be provided around it. This part here about domestic violence, this was a note to make sure we addressed it elsewhere. We have addressed it elsewhere, so I just made a note here that we addressed that above. Data here. So this was a data request combined with the education recommendation. I think this is one that doesn't make sense as a standalone in data. It makes sense to support the education recommendation, but I just want to make sure I'm getting this one right, because it says, what does this mean? If this is about schools, what are we trying to do with this one? So is there anyone on the committee that came up with this one that wants to provide any clarity? Or should we be moving this back to the education section as this is how you know if this is working or not?
I think we can go back to the education section. Unless Michael or Sadie or Cedric has an issue.
No, I agree with you, G-Day.
Got it, team. Make sure we're getting that one. I'm going to move a little faster, so if you can make sure you're helping me with really good notes, which I know you are. this one, so this was one that kind of sits here but doesn't make sense here, and we've said that a few different times, but I haven't realized where to put it yet. So this one is talking a little. Go ahead, G-Day. I see your hand.
Sorry, the police bit that's above there isn't linked to me directly to the education portion. So it shouldn't be part of the school data thing.
Exactly what you're saying here. So the one, and folks who wrote this, let me know if I'm ruining the intent here at all. This here seems related to the education.
That's correct. Yeah.
This here, is this a separate police data going forward?
I think it's
Should
kind
make
of just
sure.
a recognition of what it is we were provided, and a suggestion that it be provided on an annual basis or some other interval.
Does that make sense to everyone? So provide what we got as a task force going forward, and then make sure it can be disaggregated going forward. Okay. This one here talks more about dispatch data. Can we disaggregate by officer initiation versus community initiation, as well as by ward?
Yeah, this was just my desire to
Any
further get
clarity
more
needed?
granular with the data that we were given, because I did see the percentage that was officer initiation versus community initiation, but that didn't map to the different kind of calls for service, and it would have been useful information to have. I don't think it needs to be a recommendation, but I would hope that the next task force can get that kind of information to be able to, like, you know, do better analysis of the data. That's all.
And maybe, Michael, I could combine it with the one above where we're talking about the
Sure,
type of data
that's fine.
helpful.
Yeah.
Does that work? Great. G-Day?
Yep, works for me.
Perfect. I saw your hand. I just wanted to make sure I got you there. And then this one seems tied below. So it says quantifying instances where officers attempted to use and successfully use de-escalation techniques. There's a recommendation around incentivizing that type of behavior, and this seemed to be like the data piece that backs that up. Am I getting that correct, or is there something I'm missing on this one?
I don't think it was only that. I think it was, the idea was, and like the chief said, that all of his officers have been trained in de-escalation. I think there'd be value in quantifying how many times it's been successfully used and putting that out there. We do get quantification of use of force, which is relatively rare in Takoma Park, but I think the idea that that should just be part of the general, you know, data that goes out to the community, I think would be helpful. I think, you know, incentivizing it for officers is a slightly different issue.
Got it. So can you, Michael, I don't want to line edit this one, but it sounds like you understand what we're asking for here. And it sounds like there's some general agreement that that would be helpful. Can you help me with some language that would just flesh this one out a little bit more? Offline, or do you?
Sure, I can do that.
That would be really helpful. I want to make sure I'm not missing that one. Dispatch. There were a lot of questions around dispatch. So a couple of them were, some of these came in before the 911 flow chart. Some of them came in after the 911 flow chart that was provided. And then some of them were around, is this 24-hour victim response line the same thing we're talking about with the community safety team, or are they slightly different functions? Where do we want to start on this one? Kiminori had questions, G-Day had questions, Sadie offered a clarification of what she thought it was. I would like to just pause and see, does anyone understand exactly what we're asking for here? And if so, can you articulate it and we can see if we have some alignment around it? Or can we tie this to what we just did above with the community safety team?
What's the question? I mean, I think if the question could be
So
framed.
this one says allocate funding for the establishment of a 24-hour victim response line. And the questions that came in are these different than what we were proposing above for a 24/7 community safety team, i.e. is this the line that dispatches that team? Is this the non-emergency response line that we already have that the chief has mentioned a couple times? And so is this about providing resources to make that 24/7? There was just some confusion among the task force on what we're asking for with this. Is a 24-hour victim response line different than a 24-hour non-police dispatch line? it might require whoever proposed this to just make sure we're understanding what it is. And if there isn't that clarity, that is also really helpful to know.
So, I mean, I think I understood what I wanted it to be, but I think it was just a proposal, so open to other thoughts as to what it should be. I think the idea was that dispatch would be removed from the police department's ambit and be manned by individuals who were primarily, or maybe not primarily, but had a strong background on dealing with mental health crises, and came at things from that particular perspective. Now, they may refer things to the police department as needed, but the idea would be that the victim response line would be non-police officers who would have training in mental health issues and also would have a comprehensive understanding of the services available and would be able to refer the individual to the right department.
Got it.
So it certainly could be within or part of the community assistance team, but it wouldn't have to be.
Jide?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, it sounds like the community assistance teams, their 24-hour line or what have you would cover that.
And this is different. And there was a question on this. The question was, how is this different than the non-emergency line that the city currently has? And what I'm hearing is this is a line that you could call to access specifically mental health type resources. So you might not be looking for something to be dispatched, but you might be looking to figure out where you can reach resources.
I mean, this goes to the judgment of the task force as a whole. I mean, if we're happy with the police department answering these calls and dealing with them, you know, that's one thing. But I feel like what I heard throughout the process was that we wanted the police department to be available if there was a need for police assistance, but fundamentally we wanted to have separate individuals answering these calls so they could divert them to mental health services if need be. And so I think part of having, again, speaking for myself only, part of having a community outreach team, which will be primarily responsible for responding to mental health services, is making sure that the initial point of contact isn't a police officer.
Ajmal, this is clarifying in my mind as you're talking, so this is really helpful. So part of the idea here is if we're going to dedicate resources to forming a community assistance office and a community safety team, there should be a way to call and seek those services that don't come through a police dispatch function. There should be a direct way to reach those services. Am I getting that anywhere close to right?
Yep.
Okay. I see Kiminori, Jide, and then Chief Duvall. Kiminori?
Yeah, I think Ashmal is saying that, should 911, call operator / dispatcher be part of the police department? I think that's the sort of question that he's posing. But I may be wrong.
Jide?
Sorry, I
Yep, that's fine. That works.
Chief?
Just to clarify one thing again, our dispatchers are not police officers. I want to make that clear. And there's already a line, the crisis center is expanding their line to a 24/7 line. So anybody in Takoma Park would already be able to call that crisis center line. So we may be creating something that's already available. So it may be valuable to reach out to the crisis center to ascertain when they're going to go to 24/7 for that line availability, because right now they have it during certain hours, but it's my understanding you're expanding to 24/7, where if you have a mental health issue or a homeless issue or anything that needs that the crisis center would handle, they'll have a 24/7 line that you can call. So that line may already be in existence. It might be worth checking when they're going to go 24/7.
Got it. I think this is making more sense to me and my team. Let's reach out and get information on that we can share to further inform this one. Jide, did you have another question, sir?
No, sorry, forgot to put the hand down.
You're all set. You're all set there. Do not have armed officers respond to calls that do not require an armed officer. Kiminori and Adam were talking about, do we need more nuance? What types of calls are there? There was another thought of, have we started to address this already in some of the other sections about non-police response? And if not, is this an important bullet point to keep in here as is? I don't think there was strong advocacy either way. Just wanted to make sure there was some clarity around it. Any thoughts on this, Ajmal?
I think it's an overarching goal. So I think, again, speaking only for myself, if we move, I'm fine with moving it out of here and putting it under the neighborhood services / community services group.
I actually really like that. It provides some framing that's helpful. It is helpful here. The dispatch center, I know some folks were going to go and tour that. So if anyone wants to report out anything for the good of the order, the questions here were around, do we want to eliminate funding for one thing specifically? Is this helpful? Is it not? There was just a little back and forth on this. So I want to see where we are on that. There was also some clarification requested on what that budget item included, which we were able to provide late last week. So thoughts around this?
So I don't have any, I'm not wedded to what I initially wrote. I'm happy to sort of give you what I think are my general thoughts. So, I mean, I went and toured it today. Chief Duvall, as always, was incredibly gracious and devoted a significant amount of his time, which I really appreciated. He also shared a really handy sort of architectural chart, which showed what the build out would look like. And, don't hold me to the exact number, but based on my quick review of that chart, we're talking about somewhere between almost 8 and 10 additional rooms that are going to be put on. There's new offices, there's a new kitchen, there's a new interview room, there's a new dispatch area. We're talking about a significant expansion of the police department. At the beginning of this process, I think several members as well as community members expressed interest in sort of exploring what the right size of the police department should be and what the roles of the police department are. We've undertaken several recommendations, or not several, at least a couple recommendations, which explore moving functions outside of the police department. It just seems, again, I'm not wedded to the particular language, and I think that Jide and Adam bring up good points. It does seem a little bit incongruous to me to be building, a new wing for the police department. It's not just a dispatch area. It's several new rooms. And I think the chief brings up good points with regard to the need, but it just seems a little inconsistent to be talking about potentially changing the responsibilities of the police department by moving functions out of it while building several new rooms. So I think that's the central dilemma. I mean, the group may decide that, look, as a whole, we want to go forward with building this anyway. And certainly this is something that's been worked on for a while, as the chief explained to me. I think that and this is my last point, I'll stop after this, is I think that, the process began before this chief was here. And I think that it's still very unclear to me how they decided that these would be the specific rooms that would be built. And I think that some additional exploration of how matching up what we see the functions of the police department going forward with this building project would be appropriate. But that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Ajmal. That is helpful as always. Mayor Kate, I saw you come off mute. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just, as Ajmal said, we've been talking about this for a while and just want to provide some other information. And as people are considering this one, I guess 2 pieces of information. One is part of of the doing the this construction here is also for residents, particularly the privacy of victims. So like, as you know, like when you go into the police department now, because it's that atrium and it is so difficult to go up to where the dispatch is or other things, you can hear everything upstairs. And so for me, that's actually closing up some of this that is a consideration. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because that has been part of the conversations in the past, though very much hearing what, Ajamel, what you're saying. So that's just one thing I just wanted to throw into the conversation. The other thing, and I don't know if it matters, but as we've been talking about the ARPA funds and things like that, it is highly likely that this construction would be covered by the ARPA funds. And so, I don't know, like thinking about where we're taking money from and other things, that's just something else to consider. So.
Got it. I'm going to go Adam and then Chief.
Yeah, I was on the tour as well. I just wanted to add my thought that I think the police department space is kind of sad. As police departments go, even it's not very modern, and I think Ajmel's right that this is kind of more of a whole makeover of the department, but we're not giving them a big shiny new building, and I think that given that this has been in the works for a while, and we could draw on ARPA funds for it. I just think there are a lot of reasons why this makes sense, and we can keep an eye on allocations for other expansions, but I see the mayor's point, and I understood when I was there that it's just like the basement of this government building or the police department is crammed in there. And I think there are just a lot of functional reasons why this makes sense. And the dispatch portion of it is actually much smaller than I originally understood. Looks like it's a kind of very small, tight room. And the chief was explaining that there's a new CAD system that doesn't really even fit in that space. So they need this expanded portion of the new area to include that equipment.
Before I go to the chief, that's really helpful, Adam. Before I go to the chief, the one thing I'll throw out, and we don't have to do it in the time we have left today, I don't want to rush these. We've gotten highly nuanced and very explicit in other parts of this document. And this one's like a paragraph, and it doesn't feel like it's as built out as some of the others. So this may be one of those where we lean into the national goal of shifting some law enforcement funding into non-policing functions is one this task force supports wholeheartedly. In this specific case, due to X, Y, and Z and the availability of ARPA funds, we understand the need for specific renovations, X, Y, and Z. Going forward, we would recommend that the ongoing task force take long, hard looks at budget increases and see where those could go into the non-law enforcement type things. I think there's a way to nuance this that makes it very clear what we believe and why, instead of it's all in or it's all out. So just think through that as we move forward. Chief?
I think it's been mentioned. We essentially are in the basement of the community center. We have not expanded the police department since the 1990s, the late 1990s. We've expanded staff since then. We took on a whole section of the neighborhood services section. We had to adapt our conference room to office spaces. We are jammed in a tin can down there. There's multiple other moving parts with this construction. There are 3 bathrooms that need to be upgraded to ADA grade, so that construction needs to be done. We're creating, confidential rooms where people can be interviewed. The service to the community is going to be much more robust. We're going to have good office space. I encourage anyone that has not toured it, just walk into our dispatch center. Imagine having to spend 12 hours in that dispatch center. It is time. But I think this is a critical, addition. And describe it as adding a wing to the police department. That's all we are, is a wing. So we're not adding a wing. We are a wing of the building. So I think that's a mischaracterization. I think it's something that I think is critical to the function of the police department. It's critical for dispatch. we are finding it very, very hard to retain dispatchers. We had another dispatcher resign over the weekend. Her specific reason for resigning was the work environment. We had several people that applied to the police department to be dispatchers. When they came in and looked at the dispatcher, they just said, no, thank you. So I think that, you know, as we move forward, even if we were to decide that we need to reallocate and downsize, this is still office space that still can be utilized by the city. So it's not, you know, we're in desperate need of office space in general. And Jessica can touch on just, you know, with bringing people back to the office, we're not finding office space for them now. So there's a critical need just in general in the community center. So I just leave it at that. I mean, this would be a huge morale bust if this is not done.
So I think where we're at is, I think we've identified the terms of debate, and now we've got to find the text of the language that supports the recommendation. Ajmal, I saw your hand up, and then Jumana.
I'll be very quick. First, I definitely take issue with saying that I mischaracterized it. I mean, I'll be very specific. The entire bottom floor of the police department or the community center that's open space right now would be converted to police space. So I'll be very, very specific as to what I mean in response to the characterization that I mischaracterized something. Second, I think we should think about the message we're sending to the public. You know, I'll just leave it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ajmal. Jumana?
So I guess I'll just make a couple of observations on this. You know, by wherever the task force lands on this, the language of, but this will be ARPA funds, so it's not really like diverting other funds, and in the future we should, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that really works. And this isn't even about do you do it or you don't do it. But I think it needs to be really clear that if ARPA funds are going to this, they're not going to something else, right? I mean, that's still just a fact, wherever anybody falls on this. So I think that's one piece of it. I think the second thing that I would say is, and I hear the chief talking about the work environment and what does this do for recruiting. I also wonder, with the size of this expansion, and I'm not characterizing it anyway, I'm just saying with the size and the number of rooms and all these things, I mean, what the chief was just saying is there's nothing that says it can't be used for other spaces. I think that language being explicit up front could be useful, right? That this is being built right now, this maybe is, and I'm saying if it goes forward, that this may be what it's being used for. However, as you know, as positions shift, as government functions shift, these offices may be repurposed for X. I think it is important to put all that in there, because to say like, well, this is already in the plans and this is ARPA money, like that doesn't necessarily reflect where these conversations have been, at least me, and what the sort of thinking of this task force was from the beginning in terms of thinking about how to focus policing on particular functions and how to provide other kind of supports and other kind of responses that would lift the community in a different way and maybe even mitigate the need for policing in areas, because we've mitigated some of the issues that are coming up that they have to go respond to, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Jumana. I'm noting that here. This one also needs a goal, which I think can be clarifying as well. So we're not going to solve this one here, but I think we've got really great framing for this decision. And this may be one where majority, minority, or it may be that we can shape something that says, and future use could be, think about this. I would really like some thoughts over email between now and Thursday. We will carve out time to come back to this one if we're not finding any consensus. But is there anything else that can be added to this one right now for anyone who hasn't had a chance to jump in? Okay, let me move down. This one talked about housing and community development and adding some resources there. There was a question on, does the functionality on what we're proposing here overlap with the Community Assistance Office, or are we specifically calling out that housing and community development could use some additional staff resources because that's what we had heard? Is there a reason that one, and Adam asked a similar question, could this be rolled in at all with the community safety team, or is there a specific reason we've called out housing and community development for additional resources? Any thoughts on that?
Should be rolled in.
Okay. Pension plan here. We sent some information around on this one. And the question was, do we need to do this? Are we doing this? Is this a recommendation the group wants to make? I know Jessica sent around some information. The short answer is it's complicated and we've looked at it before and it was cost prohibitive, but is there more information that's helpful to the task force around this one? Or Jessica, any additional information you want to add on this one? I want to make sure if we leave it in, we add some clarity so that people know what we're talking about. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so I mean, we're happy to look into this more. We're just not going to be able to get exact numbers by next Tuesday. So, but yeah, we're happy to look into it. We don't have numbers in terms of what exactly the cost trade-off would be right now.
Emil?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, this is mine, or I came up with it originally. And the information that was provided about the response was provided that it would be cost prohibitive. I think more details needed there because it's not clear why enrolling new hires in the state plan would be cost prohibitive as opposed to having them in a Takoma Park only pension plan. It's not clear how the former could be more expensive to Takoma Park than the latter. So I think, yeah, we don't need information necessarily or definitive answers in a week, but I think we need more transparency about, well, this is what it costs for the current officers, and this is what it would cost to switch them over to the Maryland plan, and this is what it will cost for newly hired officers under our Takoma Park plan. This is what it would cost for newly hired officers if they enrolled in the state plan. So again, just some transparency about the numbers because I think still don't have that after multiple rounds here of this question.
Good, Jessica.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think so. I was aware of this question last week, but so yeah, I wouldn't want to give you kind of old numbers. I know the city has run those numbers at different times over the years. I don't know which years, so I'd like to get current numbers. But yeah, we can certainly provide that in the coming weeks.
And Emil, we could write this as one of these that, we don't have all the information we need to finalize a recommendation, but we believe this is important and we would recommend it for further study and transparency, something like that, if that's helpful.
That seems fine, and maybe some kind of a target date for providing more information. That would be fine.
Yep. With date. Okay. The employee assistance program, the questions around this were, do we have information on what Takoma Park PD is already doing around these things? Is this supplemental? Are we adding to it? Are we codifying it so that we show people that it's really important? That's basically what these ones were. Sawa sent some information around it being part of an engaged employee workplace and making sure that culture was a piece of it as well. Again, no time is short here, but Chief, I'm assuming there is an employee assistance program. I think where this came from was, can officers use it without, can they use it freely? And should we codify in here that it's really important that this exists for officers?
I support this 100%. And yes, I think it's worth putting in here. We do have employee assistance for officers. We have an official employee assistance. We also have peer support. But I think what's most important is to lead by example. And I've come out and said that there's no shame in reaching out for mental health assistance. I've done it myself. We've talked about it many times, but I think the thought that the department was going to hold it against people is something that is concerning, and I understand that. We heard from my staff. So anything we can do to reassure people that we support them coming forward and we're not going to retaliate, I think is important. Because it's my understanding that statement or that concern came from my staff. So I support this 100%. We have a program, but anything we can do to make it more robust and more people feel comfortable with it, I'm 100%.
Got it. And related to that, there was this recommendation that the council passed a resolution saying that all Takoma Park employees have access to mental health counseling and stress management. The question was, where did this come from and what kind of specificity do we need around it? anyone who was part of the group that made that recommendation have any more to add on this one? Go ahead, Dwayne.
Yeah, I mean, so that was a part of what we heard from just feedback generally. I think the officers, Tacoma Park police officers, like the chief just mentioned, were concerned, especially concerned that we're talking about mental health, but we haven't expressed, or it didn't seem like there was a reciprocal support for mental health support for officers who definitely need it. And then there was that concern that they would face retaliation. And then that's what the chief was alluding to. The second part of this, where it talks about just access for all Takoma Park employees to mental health counseling and stress management, was just to also emphasize that type of support should be made available to all employees, officers, dispatch workers, those who are providing support to the community throughout Takoma Park, that level of support should be available to everybody, officers, everyone. So that's why that was placed in there.
So Dwayne, I don't want to mischaracterize you, but is it correct that you're saying you wanted basically the council and others to go on record saying we support this and there'll be no retaliation for using these services? Or is it for additional services?
I mean, it's just a call for those services. I mean, I think we wanted to just emphasize that officers should not fear retaliation in perhaps losing access to doing their job because they're seeking mental health support. But we also think it's important for all employees of Takoma Park, if we're going to talk about mental health support, that all employees have the ability to access that for themselves.
Got it. Okay. This one was a simple clarity that when we're talking about housing subsidies, the committee that wrote this was thinking about rental subsidies specifically and narrowing that a bit. Kiminori said that there's evidence that's mixed on incentivizing officers and city officials to live in the cities they serve, but they don't see any harm in supporting this. So just making sure that clarity was added in there. Any questions on that one? Okay, this is an easy section. This is saying the resource guide is important, but maybe it's not a standalone recommendation. Can we put it in as part of what the new neighborhood services team community assistance office would be looking at around all things mental health? Are resources such as this one? Does that work for everybody? It's a nice type of deliverable. Thanks, G-Day. Subcommittee 1 added some language around the goal here, which is good. So this goal, there was some feedback from a couple of folks that this goal wasn't the right goal for this, and that the real goal here is around increasing transparency of investigations into complaints around police officers, and then kind of everything below that laid that out. So before it was talking about communication with police, and it seems like that was the wrong goal applied to this section. So Adam, I added this in here based on Kiminori's question and your response: increased transparency of investigations with complaints about police officers. This is one that we're still looking at. This was, can we publish code violations on our website? We're trying to see if the county does it. If so, we'll link to it. If not, that can be a standalone type of data sharing. So here, what is this one? Improve. Go ahead, Kiminori.
So you deleted that goal, but that was part of probably the recommendations too. I'm not sure anymore, but
this one here.
Right.
So in our very first draft, there was talking about increased communication, and then there was the discussion that that's more of a goal, and it was put above this section here, but it wasn't the right area for it. So the stuff below isn't about increasing communication. It was about increasing transparency into investigations.
Right,
So,
I understand. But I initially, thought of something like revamping the chief's advisory board, and then, there's a little bit of tweak around it, and maybe we should just create a new sort of community police liaison program or council or something like that, so that citizens, the residents can share their public safety concerns with the police in a more robust way. So it's not a goal, but it was a recommendation.
it was, and that one came out, and folks helped me with this, but the subcommittee that had made that recommendation, I believe that recommendation came out when we had the discussion around, are we creating a lot of new bodies? Are we trying to create one? And the revamped police advisory board, chiefs advisory board, was removed at that point.
Yep. No,
Anyone remember that?
that's correct. The first time we brought it here to the full group, that was removed and condensed some of those bodies together. So I'm not sure if some of that communication or translation was missed in the middle. But I know last week when we discussed this, it was let's move this up to a goal, as it was around transparency in investigations and complaints.
So it got absorbed into something else. I just want to make sure it lives somewhere there, somewhere else. That's all.
Yep. It got absorbed kind of into the functionalities of the above boards.
So what if, let me highlight this one. Let me make sure that in the updated task force language that this is accomplished.
Yep.
Got it. Does that work, Kiminori?
Yes.
Okay. We talked about this one. Kiminori, I want to make sure I'm getting this one right. It says, my comment on sharing call dispatch data applies here and should be consolidated.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the dispatch data, the call for service data, that can have sort of geographic information. And then, Baltimore, Montgomery County, they all have a similar format in terms of their open data portal. So I think we can follow their leads.
So kind of, is there some consistency in how data is shared across jurisdictions? Is that the idea here?
Right. And then we just mentioned that kind of dispatch data separately up there, but that can be part of the sort of bigger goal of sharing more data in a consistent and sustainable way.
G-Day, I want to make sure I'm getting this one right here. Your question was about non-Takoma Park residents and if demographic data for surrounding zips can be provided in the context of broader stops and arrest data.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, so we have, we have some nominal like zip code information based on traffic stops or what have you. The hope was that if, a number of people are being pulled over in like College Park, let's say, can we provide the demographics for College Park to provide some context or what have you for the surrounding areas that were, that these stops and whatnot are happening in.
Okay, so that's a clarification one. I'm going to scroll through. I don't think we it's fair to keep people much longer, but let me scroll through and see where we're missing anything. So this one was moved when we formed some of the new divisions up above. This one was around continuing that the task force work with Takoma Park PD to develop detailed guidance on what sorts of traffic offenses do or do not warrant a stop. Ajamel and Adam went back and forth, so we're not kind of just leaving out there what a low-level offense is. We're indicating that that'll be part of the ongoing discussion. The chief provided some information on current direction. I think the goal here is to make sure that that is codified in some sort of real way. The goal here is around subcommittee 1, added this one. Let's see, the task force, you asked for state level guidance. We provided that on this one. So I think the one of the last really big ones here was around speed cameras. So there were 2 questions here. There was, do we want to look at some sort of poverty exemption? If we do, are there models for that? And is there a kind of best practices and what that should look like? Ajamel and Adam provided some interesting back and forth on what that could look like around if we want to do this, what is the right percentage to look at? I know some folks are probably seeing this for the first time, so I'm opening it up for any discussion. We can also put a pin in this one and say, if we agree that an exemption is something we want to talk about, let's dedicate some of our time on Thursday to figuring out if there's some clarity we want to provide around that one. Does that sound fair? So we'll send this around and we'll make sure that the task force is really focused on what this one should be here. And then this is one of the ones where
Michael,
majority.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just a typo that I made in my comment. The second 150 should be 100%. Sorry, there we go. That should be 100. I'm sorry, that was an error on my part.
No worries. No worries here. So we'll come back to that one. So on this one, in addition to the poverty exemption and whether we wanted to adopt a policy around that, there was a question here on whether we recommend prohibiting the establishment of additional speed cameras or not. There was some real back and forth on this one. It seems like there are task force members on a few different sides of this issue. And so this was really coming into, okay, can we say some of us believe this and here's why, and some of us believe this, here's why, and here's the guidance around it. There was some proposed language in here where Adam and Ajamel went back and forth. We don't have enough people of the task force left on the call to take any sort of vote on this, but I'd like to throw out the framing so that folks can see it and see if they get comfortable with it. And then we can move through that on Thursday. G-Day?
Yeah, so I guess the only thing that I had was, it seems like generally people are agreed that we want to limit stops or what have you and things like that that we may think are unnecessary or introduce additional risk or whatever the term is. It seems like putting a limitation on the number of speed cameras you have would be antithetical to that, especially given that we already have a poverty exemption.
Other thoughts on that?
I care more about the poverty exemption than I do the establishment of new zones. I think, yeah, I think that's it. And I think that the devil's in the details with regards to how much of a poverty exemption we want.
Got it. My son does not want to take a bath, if you're wondering what's happening behind me here. Perfect. So we will update that one, send it back around. So this one is around community-oriented policing services. This was updated. Kiminori, you added some reference material around this. Chief, I know you had said in previous meetings that a lot of the community-oriented policing is already adopted. So this was support and not kind of establish, kind of saying we support that model of policing and some of the specifics around what we heard or what the task force heard. This is where the incentives came in. So some of the data stuff about how we capture that should be moved down here. Any questions around any of this? The police body camera policy, I know we've talked about very extensively here, and talking about what we're trying to solve for. Adam, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Are you looking to delete transparency as the word here, or did we just capture that correctly? Update the policy to ensure greater accountability and transparency. Is that the goal?
Yeah, I think it should be accountability and transparency.
Perfect.
I don't know what the proposed deletion is.
I'm just going to delete that comment. It must have been trans. You added a footnote to this one. I'm just going to scroll down through here. There weren't a lot of questions, except for here. It seems more broadly like it might be prudent to have technologies to serve and protect the public be evaluated to ensure the most and best and just outcomes. So just kind of some framing about how we're evaluating the ongoing evaluation of these. Chief?
Just one clarification on the traffic stops. All of our vehicles are equipped with in-car video, so they will capture it anyway. So I think the justification was that is to help resolve any disputes about how long it took for the subject to stop. That's already going to be captured by the in-car video. So I don't know if that's necessarily needed. And all of our cars have in-car video.
Yeah, I didn't realize you guys had dash cams as well. You're well equipped, so I think that deleting that one is fine unless anyone objects. I do think that accomplishes.
Is that this one, Adam? That one?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. This one down here was a question that this doesn't really look like a goal as some of the other ones do. And And so it says, so GDA had suggested that maybe we change that goal to decrease societal structural deficiencies and reduce the cost to residents most effective. It might be a better way to state that one. This was from subcommittee 1, so I don't want to change a goal without checking with the subcommittee, so we can send this one back around, but that was a recommendation for an updated goal there. These number 6 was very similar to the discussion we had above about, where do we need to say that we're reallocating funding from policing and moving them here versus where do we need to say we want to fund this and here's why. We had a pretty robust discussion around that previously. So again, I think folks are somewhat clear in their positions on some of this is about reallocating resources away from law enforcement into other means, and other folks are about creating new programs. So I don't know how much more there is to cover on this one other than to see if we can get a sense of the group. And this might be something that we have to come back to when we have more of the group on again on Thursday. But those were the 2 questions to these ones. No one questioned the goal. They were questioning, are these reallocation goals, or are these are things that need to be funded? Any thoughts on that, or should we come back to that one Thursday with the full group? The last couple of things here around license plate readers. The big thing here, there was a lot of questions around whether we want to put in recommendations like this, a specific group. So there were some comments around ACLU is great, but do we want to be citing them as the reason that we are for or against this? Do we want to be linking to their recommendations, or do we want to say the task force should get best information going forward? Jide?
Sorry, I think one of the things that I tried to say when I looked on the ACLU's website, I don't think that they were arguing for a blanket prohibition. I think that they were also suggesting, some sort of nuance and actually crafting rules of the road, if you will.
I think, sorry, just to jump in, I don't know if you guys want, I think there's a distinction here between the Maryland ACLU that did object to the license plate readers and came to our city council meeting versus what we're following the national ACLU guidelines. So you could put that in there. I just to go to Jide's point is that it's a little bit more complicated. When we were discussing this policy about 7 years ago, the Maryland chapter of the ACLU was asking us to go further than even the national ACLU's recommendation at that time.
Got it. Group, what do you think about that?
Well, but it's possible that we should all just revisit this. I'm not saying that. I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
I think it would be helpful to know before Thursday, I can pull what national says with regards to the privacy safeguards. Kate is correct with regards to what happened 7 years ago. Kate and I are smiling because this is how we met. We were on opposite sides of the issue, but all friendly, all friendly.
Oh, very friendly. And honestly, we haven't looked at this in seven years. So I think that could also be one of the things and I haven't looked at what national ACLU is now recommending.
Yeah, and then I agree. Yeah,
this could be a good thing to revisit.
I'll ping the folks at Maryland too and see if their views have changed on it as well. So I'll ping David Roca, who is lead for them on this at the Maryland affiliate. And I'll also put what national's information sharing guidelines are, and maybe the chief or Mayor Stewart could figure out what the information sharing guidelines that are currently in place are for Takoma Park.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll help you with that. It's Jimena.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. This one here was another, we're not, it doesn't appear we're unified as a task force, which is fine and happens on all task forces. So this was more, are we eliminating all funding for the current use of and purchase of additional license plate reader technology? Some are comfortable with that type of recommendation, some aren't. So there were 2 kind of different thoughts and justifications laid out that we can align with or not as we go forward. This is again one that we'd want to have a broader discussion with a broader section of the task force to see kind of where we align on it. But it seems like the terms of debate on this one are pretty clear. Is there anything else people want to add to this one or have any questions? I know Adam and Ajamel did a lot of work back and forth, and Jide added some stuff in a question around this one. So I just want to make sure we've captured everything on this. And then the last one in that vein is around canine. The recommendation being, are we eliminating the funding and use of canines after the retirement of the single canine currently employed, period? Or are we doing that and supporting future canine use for tracking and direction purposes, but not for use against individuals? Robust the discussion back and forth on this one. I think, again, terms are clear. So this might be one where the majority feels this, the minority
because if there's a need for canines or what have you, and Takoma Park doesn't have them, they're just going to go to Montgomery County. Isn't that accurate, Chief Duvall? Or what would happen in that instance if Takoma Park didn't have them?
Yeah, I talked about this at length when I presented to the council. Unless the council came up with a policy that restricted the use of canine by the Takoma Park Police Department in Takoma Park, we would rely on other agencies for that type of use. We also could not prohibit other agencies from coming within the city of Takoma Park to deploy dogs. So yes, we would be relying on other agencies if that were the case.
And effectively at the mercy of them for whatever their policies are.
That is correct.
Ashbel?
Then that's helpful. Thank you. Then I wonder if the right approach then is to go with something along the lines of what Adam suggested in one of his comments, which had to do with, even if the Constitution requires a certain level of cause with regards to whether or not canines are used, we could, of course, recommend that officers follow additional precautions or have additional cause before they use canines. So that would be an approach that I would be comfortable with. And then it just is figuring out what the right level of cause is or not.
Perfect. I'm making a note here so that we can follow up on the language around that one. This one, go ahead, Jumana, please.
I just want to make sure on that one, though, that, going forward, that it's very clear about the limitations on use, because I would really strongly object to the use of dogs for anything other than like a scent tracking. And I mean, no dog, no drug sniffing dogs, no, in particular, absolutely no dogs in apprehensions. Like, I think there needs to be those parameters around it. So I think even as we sort of like walk this back, this may be a point of contention or disagreement, but I feel super strongly that those things be explicit.
Excellent. I got that. I saw Emil and Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with Jamal, but I'm also, I didn't look at Chief Duvall's testimony to the city council on this. I never thought that we'd be spending so much time on canines, although I do love dogs, and Kota, I believe is his name, sounds awesome. But I completely agree with Jumana, and I'm confused when we say that if we don't have a canine, then we have to call on Montgomery County to deploy a canine, and we don't have any control over how that canine is deployed. That's confusing to me. So what are the situations? And well, I guess my question is, if we have a policy that prohibits use of canines for apprehension, then that's not a situation in which we would be calling on Montgomery County to deploy a canine for apprehension, correct? The policy is Takoma Park, or the policy would be Takoma Park police don't use canines for apprehension, either our own canine or a canine from Montgomery County Police Department. Is everyone in agreement on that? Because otherwise, a policy where we don't do it, but someone else does it, doesn't seem meaningful to me.
Emil, if I can just comment on this, you're absolutely correct, and that's what I said. We would, when I testified to the council, I said we would have to, if we did this, enact a policy that says that we would not do that or we would not request that. Now that's different than say the county police a couple months ago had a vehicle pursuit that ended a bailout in Takoma Park, and they deployed their dog. We could not stop other agencies from coming in within the city of Takoma Park and deploying dogs for apprehension. But like I said, if we eliminated a canine unit, there would have to be an accompanying policy that said we would not utilize for A, B, C, and D. So you're correct.
Okay, thank you, Chief Tall. That's helpful.
Thank you, Emil. Adam, and then Jide, we see your hand raised, and then Jumana, you're up after that.
Yeah, so I don't want to turn this into a full-fledged debate about canine. I think we need to return to it on Thursday when we have the full task force, but I just think that maybe a potential point of agreement on the type of dog that the city might have going forward. I did a little more research on this in the past week, and I just understand, as Ajmel has pointed out in the past, dogs can be trained either for drugs or for what's called EOD, which is like bomb and gun sniffing. And either type of those dogs could do, I think, the functions that most everyone is interested in preserving, which is like tracking and article searches. So it might just be that we think that Takoma Park should have gun and bomb sniffing dogs that do tracking as opposed to drug sniffing dogs, because I think it's more important to try to get guns off the street than drugs anyway. So that might be somewhere where we can reach an agreement.
Thank you, Adam. Jumana?
But still to clarify, because the idea that, so you say, sure, we don't use dogs for apprehension, but we needed a dog for tracking and we called Montgomery County. I think we can't let go of the fact that at that point, if the dog is tracking a person and they locate that person, there's nothing that's keeping that dog from being used in the apprehension of that person or from mauling that person in the context of apprehension, right? And so I think this is why bright lines can be useful. I don't know that it's often that we need a bomb sniffing dog, but that's a very particular type of dog that is not what we have in Takoma Park, right? And for anybody who's sort of like the public listening, the whole reason that dogs are trained to sniff differently is you can't have a dog sniff a backpack and indicate there's something in that and not know if the dog sniffed a bomb or drugs, right? Because if it's a drug sniffing dog, you look in the backpack. If it's a bomb sniffing dog, you're going to get a special unit, right? You can't have dogs that are cross-trained for that purpose. And so I just think we need to be super clear what it means if we're going to preserve the use of dogs, even if we're calling them in from other counties. The chief just said, we can't tell them how to use their dog, and that's true, right? We have no authority over Montgomery County and how they're going to use their dog, and so we need to be very clear on what can still happen in those scenarios. And again, in the event, and God willing, there's never this kind of event that you need a bomb sniffing dog. It's not like there aren't agencies that would come through for you, right? I don't see that as something that Takoma Park needs on a full-time basis. Again, unless the chief has other information, I've not known about many bomb scares in Takoma Park. So I just want sort of very clear thought around this debate and what we're proposing and what the ramifications can be.
Thank you, Jumana. Emil, I saw your hand. Or was that from before, sir?
Sorry, that was from before. My bad.
Okay, got it. So I have here that we need to look at updated language. We need to look at the Montgomery County role, the training pieces of it, see where specificity is important, and if anything needs to be changed around that. We will come back to this as a full group on Thursday, but I'd love to update the language from the discussion we just had if folks can work with me on that. Last page and a half here. So this one was around education and SROs. This was the basic question was, the recommendation is to pass a resolution calling for all Montgomery County SROs to come out of Takoma Park schools. The question was, didn't we hear that there aren't any SROs in Takoma Park schools anyway? So if that's the case, is that a recommendation that is needed or not?
So it was that there are no, that's a good question. It was, if I remember correctly, that there are no Takoma Park police SROs. I remember the chief answered that very helpfully, I think on one of the first days, but there are Montgomery County police SROs. And so this was that was what the purpose of the resolution was to sort of push that advocacy at the council level, especially given so many council residents are on the county council. And that I think one of the problems with SROs in schools, although not the only ones, is that although students don't have the full constitutional rights, specifically with regards to the Fourth Amendment, that they in the school context that they would have outside of schools, they still do retain some rights in the school context, specifically the right to remain silent. And so, you know, students should be aware of what their rights are if they're going to be dealing with police officials, because I mean, personally speaking from personal experience, oftentimes students don't know that they have different rights and there can be different consequences when interacting with an SRO as opposed to interacting with a teacher. I think the resolution bit is a nice piece, but I think the one that's really important and impactful from my perspective is the Know Your Rights trainings.
Mm-hmm. And I think the question I have, Ajmal, do you know the answer is? I thought SROs were not at the middle school and elementary school level.
Are they only at Blair?
I believe the SRO program is high school. And so, Chief, you can clarify for me, but that's why I don't think we have any SROs in Montgomery County or anybody in our schools.
Well,
First of all,
Mayor Stewart, sorry, go ahead. Chief
any school in Takoma Park, if there was an SRO to be assigned to a school in Takoma Park, it would be by a Takoma Park police officer. As I've made it very clear, we do not have SROs. The way the SRO system works is they have officers assigned to high schools, but they also have the clusters under them. So although they function and work in high schools, they also can be deployed to different incidents at elementary schools or middle schools. I'll give you an example. My daughter is a patrol, and a corporal with the county police who's an SRO gives them training and certain various things. So yes, there are no SROs at the middle and elementary school assigned and walking around, but they still interface with other with the middle schools and elementary schools. That helps.
Okay. So that's how we should clarify that then, if that's what the task force wants.
I think that I could go, again, speaking only for myself, I think I could go either way on the resolution. It doesn't seem to accomplish much. I think the Know Your Rights piece is still important. And even if, I think just as a matter of sort of raising educated sort of young people, I think that it would be really positive if that was something that we did in our schools. And I think that that is a matter of public safety, because many of them are going to interact with the police at some point, and they may not be lucky enough to interact with Chief Duvall or somebody who works for Chief Duvall. They may be interacting with people from a different department. And so I think it's a good public safety measure to ensure they have training so they know what their constitutional rights are.
Jide?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that maybe it should stay. It should just be, you know, the caveat should be, we're already doing this. We should make sure that it remains the kind of law of the land for Takoma Park, something like that.
That's also a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those, like, we are happy that it's not happening here. We'd like to make sure that happens. Either way, the Know Your Rights stuff we think is really important.
Well,
Dwayne?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in and say, you know, I support what Jide was saying. I think it's important for our council to put forth the point about SROs, even though they're not currently being utilized in schools. At Takoma Park Police aren't serving as SROs, but I think we should just maintain some level of a resolution in support of having the, you know, not having SROs in our Takoma Park schools.
Thank you, Dwayne. Jumana, and then Chief Duvall.
So I agree with Dwayne, and to be more specific, I think having a resolution, even sort of that's instructive to the county. I mean, I think Ajmal already sort of pointed out that a number of people on the board are, live in Takoma Park, but also all the kids in Takoma Park are going to end up at a county high school. And I also think that people forget that after the Parkland shootings, there was a whole discussion at the elementary school about whether or not there needed to be a security officer. And I was deeply involved in that. So this comes up periodically. And I don't think that it's just sort of a missed, like just sort of like a fluff recommendation to have clarity on the council issue. I think it's important, and I think it's instructive also to the parents of the PTA who consider these issues, and to the school board members who consider these issues, and to the people who want to raise these issues as they get concerned about things happening in other places. So,
Chief.
I was just going to echo what Jemana just said, that all of the kids that live in Takoma Park are going to go to a high school. So I think taking a stance on this, because it's our kids that are going to these high schools, and I fully support the know your rights. I think it's not only helpful from educating students, but it's also helpful for police departments, deal with people that are educated on their own rights and so on. My main point was just to echo what Jemana said.
Perfect. I love that. Am I, Jemana? Is that a new hand?
Nope, sorry, I'll put it down.
No worries. Very good. Okay, this is all clear. Oh, one thing here, there was a recommendation to ask schools to adopt a restorative justice approach to resolving student discipline. Question about it, could we include a citation or a reference to what that is so that it's clear what we're referring to? Anyone on the call have access to that? If not, we can push it out to the larger group. A model of a restorative justice model.
I can take that, but there are probably others as well, but I'll take that one.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ajmal.
I spelled your name wrong. There we go. Okay, we did that one. G-Day, do you want to unpack this on 28? It was something about grants for parents to join PTA.
I think that was kind of a recent thing that I suggested. It was just based on, my wife happened to mention that some of the PTA she'd looked at or what have you required funds. And so I was suggesting creating a grant for parents that may not have the financial means to join, to broaden the representation. There are some of the PTAs do have waivers, but I'm not sure if they all do. So it was just a kind of a shot in the dark.
Thank you, Jemana.
Well, at least for Takoma Park Elementary and Piney Branch, where I have or had kids, the PTA explicitly doesn't just have waivers, but you can, as other parents, sort of buy in at a higher level so that there are available memberships for other parents. So there are current mechanisms that you can talk to the at least, again, this is Piney Branch and Takoma Park Elementary. I imagine it's the same at Takoma Middle because it's a fairly supportive PTA. But I support the idea of it, but I think that the PTAs have kind of built it into their structure.
Okay, you can nuke it.
Got it. Thank you, G-Day. Thank you, Jemana. Citation for the positive effects that practicing mindfulness has on lowering implicit biases. I think this is another, if there's data that backs this up, let's drop it in to make it stronger.
I emailed that to you guys before the start.
Thank you. You got it. Thank you. Thank you, G-Day. Perfect. I'm going to make that note here. That we've got that already. Proposed language. Could we perhaps narrow this Montgomery County high school students who live in Takoma Park? This was about a mentorship program, and should one be created? And the question was, should we be more specific on this one so we know specifically what we're asking for here? Any objections to that? Okay.
Can I ask you a question, Michael? Sorry.
Please.
Is there a reason it says public high school? I just curious from the task force. We have Don Bosco, we have a couple of other private. I just was curious if we wanted to explicitly say public.
Is there any specific reason for that, folks, or should it be high school students?
High school students is fine.
Yeah.
Perfect. This one about training, G-Day said, my group wrote this, but I believe the police department is working on MOUs, so she would clarify with the chief and clean up or remove this language. Was this specifically, G-Day, around guardian policing?
No, I must have mixed things up. I think that there was a section later that dealt with MOUs. Oh, there you go.
Oh, got it. Yep, right
Sorry
here.
about that.
So continue efforts to create and strengthen MOUs with all area police departments. Chief, anything you want to add around that? Is that
we currently have an MOU with the Montgomery County Police that we have a revisiting. I think it's every 3 years, which we're due to complete. That we attempted to get an MOU with the Metropolitan Police Department. They flat out said they did not want an MOU. The Metropolitan Police Department does not have an MOU with any of their adjoining agencies, whether it be Prince George's County, whether it be us, whether it be Arlington, whether it be Montgomery County. They don't have MOUs. And that came up with because of several cross-jurisdictional that occurred that an MOU could have been very beneficial. Prince George's County kind of takes the same stance with MOUs. We tried to work with them to get one. They really don't go into MOUs with agencies that fall outside of Prince George's County. But we do have MOUs with a lot of other agencies, Park Police, Rockville City, the Sheriff's Department, a bunch of others. But I think that coordination of those MOUs and resources is important, because if we're developing policies and procedures in the park that benefit us, it would also make sense to have that discussion.
Got it. So it sounds like, that's not an unhelpful recommendation to call for those types of things. You're trying to get the ones you can get. Some of the police departments aren't responding to that. This might give that a little bit more umph. There was a recommendation here. Let me pause there. Does that sound right to everybody? Does that address your question? Okay. What is this? Innovative and progressive policies. So this is basically talking about reviewing and updating the coordination protocols for incidences. Chief, again, this was one where there was some thought that this is probably always happening, but can we put it in here as part of, we want to make sure that some of Takoma Park's initiatives and progressive policies that are coming out of this are factored into regional response.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense to memorialize that. We already are doing that. We meet on a regular basis, but I think it's great to memorialize it here.
Got it. Create a community relations diversity outreach training. The point was that this is kind of high level. Are there any specific recommendations we can add in here around that? Facilitators for whichever group recommended this, maybe we could go back and just add in some of those specifics. I think Professor Demchuk's training was one of them that was mentioned, and some others. We're getting some feedback from someone, sorry. And the last two here, this came up twice. Should we add anything in here around pedestrian and traffic safety? I think this came from the fact that it came up in a couple of the public listening sessions. There was an idea that we want to make sure we're responding to that. Anything around that? So Kim and Ori recommended we should clarify in the report that we're not directly addressing traffic and pedestrian safety, but maybe indirectly through some of the recommendations. Is this something that we want to say the ongoing task force should look at these issues, or do we want to just kind of pull it out altogether? Any strong feelings on that? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll leave the question in the updated draft that goes around. So if anyone has any specific feelings or thoughts on that, we can add them in. And then Kim and Ori, if you're still with us, this last one was yours, and I want to make sure that I'm getting it correctly. You added quite a bit about making sure that we were kind of living up to the charge of the task force, and I dropped it here on the end. Anything you wanna speak to here? Go ahead, Kim and Ori.
Yeah, I just, I think a couple people, the public sessions or, comments mentioned this. So make sure that, I think, if they're all in, I think it lives in the, individual recommendations, but we want to clarify that, we are addressing, or we're trying to address the sort of racial issue with some of the recommendations. And the other thing is about sort of over policing and under policing dilemma. So that's another sort of just my two cents basically. I think we talk about a lot of over policing and make sure that the armed police officers are not responding to certain calls, or all that recommendation there, but we don't talk about sort of an issue of under policing as much. So
Thank you,
That's my
Kaminori.
thoughts, yeah.
No, that's really helpful framing. Jide?
Yeah, to Kaminori's point, the focus group or what have you that was dealing with some of the, I guess, the communities that have less of a voice in Takoma Park certainly articulated a need for kind of maybe more visitation or more oversight. And it seemed like that was also something that came up with the kind of Takoma Langley businesses. So, perhaps some more direct recommendations about around that or what have you. Either, some sort of patrol or maybe a bicycle or something like that. I don't know exactly what it should look like, but
I thought there were some other recommendations in another section that spoke specifically to foot and bike patrols in the business districts. I remember seeing it early on. I know it's been a long evening, but I thought it was.
Yep, there was a bike recommendation in the community-oriented.
Yeah, community-oriented policing. Yeah.
So I will. We can go back and make sure that's highlighted there. I see a good discussion in the chat. Jumana and the mayor are going back and forth. Why not both cultural competence and anti-racism? I was thinking about going beyond explore cultural diversity in the draft we have now. So if there's any specific language choice that needs to be updated throughout this, please make sure we get that so that we can implement it. Dwayne, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was just adding my voice to this particular recommendation here. I do like it, but I was also reminding me of something that we talked about in our group with respect to making sure it's inclusive of individuals with disabilities, with respect to making the community more livable, more for residents. So perhaps there's room for something within this one to indicate that we would like to ensure, we want to ensure that our community is not only just addressing racial inequities, which is inequalities, but also is accessible for individuals with disabilities. Because I think in our group, Dara Baldwin brought that up about just access for individuals with disabilities is always can be, although the ADA requires certain physical accessibility requirements throughout, and I think Takoma Park does a really good job at it. It's important to also just convey that information publicly so that we are, letting individuals with disabilities know that we are committed to ensuring they have the same level of access as individuals without disabilities.
Absolutely. And what I'm wondering, and you can't see her, but Carol from our team is on here. She's been trying to make sure all of the charge and the information that's going to formulate the overall report is got all of that information in it. So I'm wondering, some of this might be framing material there, but I think it could also be stronger in some of the goals throughout this document. So let's collectively take a look back through and see where that fits, because I remember that being a really impactful section. Jumana?
So I don't know if anyone else has something on this one, because I have a more general comment. I'm happy to wait if somebody else has something on this point.
I also want to make sure that what's happening in the chat here, I believe that's all around number 42. Is that correct? Okay. So team, let's make sure we're getting what's in the chat and apply it to building out number 42. Go ahead, Jumana.
So the thing that occurs to me, and I did dip out for a part of this meeting because I had to, but in listening to sort of the way things are starting to get discussed, like, I just want to go back to remembering what our initial mission is, which is reimagining public safety. And I feel like part of what we're getting into now is into the weeds of, but dogs can be really useful in this instance, but we really need this for that instance. Like, here's the thing, as someone who writes grants, you can make the argument for everything you need, plus some extra stuff, and then some other things in between. And then you can always find a case as to why that's relevant. And it's not, to me, I don't think we should be thinking in terms of, but is there a scenario where this specific thing is relevant? I think we need to be thinking in terms of, is this what we want policing to look like in our community? And I think that needs to be the driving question, because at the end of the day, police forces that do things differently still exist, right? And they exist differently, and they're able to do their job, and they're able to have jobs that they like. And I don't think that every time we suggest something that would shrink the size of the department or maybe change some of the funding needs to be looked at as an attack on the police or policing, or making it seem like we think our police are just as bad as Ferguson, because I was actually said at some point. And I don't think, I mean, I'd have a lot more to say if our police department looked like Ferguson's, right? So I just want to leave that out there because I feel like this discussion has gotten dragged into all the specific instances where a specific type of model might work, or things have just always been this way, why change it? Because that is actually our mission, right? Is to come up with recommendations to change it and to think about it differently. And so I just want that to be, I mean, maybe this is a more useful conversation when we had more people on, because I know it's pretty late, but I just want to bring us back to the initial mission and why we were actually brought together to do this. It wasn't to go back and investigate each and every instance of, have the police use this? Did it work when they used it? Did we like it when they used it? You know, when it comes to ALPRs, do I want my car being surveilled every time I drive around so they can like track me around the city? No, I don't. Like that actually can be a valid reason to think about it. Not was it useful in these instances or how long do they hold the information? But on a bigger level, that can be part of the consideration. And I just think we should think about that sort of mission going forward.
Got it. Thank you, Jumana. Ajmal? I'm sorry, I saw Jide and then Ajmal. Jide? Did you have your hand up?
I actually don't think I have my hand up.
Okay,
I do
perfect.
have thoughts, but I'm happy to
Ajmal,
keep
go
them to
ahead.
myself.
Okay, we'll do Ajmal and then I'll come back to you, Jide, if you'd like. Go ahead, Ajmal.
I really appreciate everything that Jumana said. Separately, I have a process question. For a lot of these, there are different points of view. And I don't know when I'm speaking whether or not I'm representing like a specific wing or of the group. And I don't know if wing's the right word. I've already used that once. So I don't know if I'm representing a specific party of the task force or just me on the task force. And likewise, I think, you know, when people are pushing back against things that I say, I also don't know whether they're representing a specific piece of the task force or most of the task force. And so we have to make a decision about what our process is going to be like. We either should go through these where we have disagreements and we should just vote on them, or people should say, hey, I don't really care. Y'all who have strong feelings about it, just fight it out and figure it out. But I think there's we're all in the same ballpark on a lot of these, but there are some real points of disagreement. And I think we need a way to resolve that other than my loud voice just speaking up or somebody else contradicting me and not having a sense of how much we actually represent the number of people on the task force.
Thank you, Ajmal. I've got a process thought around that. I'm specifically informed by the incredible progress you all made tonight, but Emil, go ahead first.
Yeah, first of all, I want to strongly endorse what Jumana said. She said it better than I could, so I don't want to add anything, but I agree 100%. And I also agree with what Ajmal said about process. Well, I feel like, yes, when there is legitimate disagreement, I think my suggestion would be that we vote on it, because I don't mind this ad hoc approach, but again, it's 8:46 and some people have dropped off. And so just canvassing the people who remain on the call and seeing whether or not they have a view, to me, isn't really the most representative way to approach it. So I think we should identify the ones where there is some significant agreement and then just vote on it, or have some other way of the whole task force being able to weigh in on those questions, and not, again, the handful of people who are still on this call.
Was there more, Emil? Your audio cut out.
No, I muted myself. That was it.
Got it. I will point out that the full task force has gotten multiple iterations of these documents, asked for another task force meeting to go through them line by line. So I believe we're at a point where the folks who feel most strongly about certain items are naturally the ones who are going to be asked to help clarify and consolidate the text around that. In going through what we've done over the last 3 hours and 15 minutes, I feel like those where there are really divergent ideas, we've noted that, and we need to spend Thursday figuring out what those are going to be. I don't think watering things down to the middle is always the best approach, nor do I think that's happening here. I think there are some recommendations where folks are saying, I believe this, other people believe this. Let's take a vote on those and see where we come out. But it does seem like the group has been doing a lot of work to put as many of these forward as possible as recommendations from the task force for future action and exploration, which I think can be helpful. But Jide, go forward, sir.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I feel like where there are differences, I have no problem with voting on them or denoting that we have differences of opinion. But you know, I guess from my perspective, the other thing is like, I'm looking at this, when I was reading some of the focus groups or what have you, for those groups that to me were marginalized, I didn't necessarily always feel that I heard some of the concerns that they seem to be articulating in the focus group being actually discussed. And from my perspective, you know, safety isn't just, you know, kind of trying to limit police interactions. It's also taking care of the things that police may traditionally do. And so, you know, when I look at this, it's not just, you know, it's not just about what's on the paper for me. It's about whether or not my kids are going to be safe, both in their interactions with police and when they're walking down the street or what have you, in situations where maybe some sort of benign police activity may have also protected them. So I don't see it as a kind of either or. I think that there is some middle ground that we can find or what have you. And I would caution us against thinking that we have to be potentially extreme in one respect or another. And that's just kind of my bit.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So process-wise, thank you. And I see some comments in the chat as well. It is very late on a Tuesday. We have one more meeting. We've run a lot of these processes. Adding more and more meetings are not going to make the recommendations better and better at this point. What we have to do is bring this process to a close at a natural point, turn our great work over to the City Council so their process can start, informed by the work here. So we will work once again overnight tonight to try and get an updated version back around to the task force. There are some folks who love getting updated versions by task force. There's some people who don't. We're going to send it out for those that do like updated versions that way, to make sure that you've got a full run of the road on where we ended tonight, especially for any of our task force members who had to drop. It just gives us one consolidated document. It may not feel like it 3.5 hours in, but we made some pretty significant progress tonight. So we're going to go back through, we're going to consolidate all the work that's been done, get this back around to everyone tomorrow. We will then use that document on Thursday, and we will again not go point by point by point, because we've now done that 2 meetings in a row. So folks that had really significant thoughts on that, either in these last 2 meetings or in the subsequent emails since, likely have had an opportunity to share their thoughts point by point. So we want to use Thursday to really dig in on those items where there is a divergence, or where we have to confirm updated language, or where we're still missing a goal. So we'll be spending Thursday on a more focused discussion. It's your meeting. We can take it anywhere we want to, but our goal is really to use Thursday to really consolidate around those items where we really need to see where people stand on specific items. At the same time, all of the background information, all of the focus group reports, everything that the group has been using to inform their work, that is all being consolidated so it can be part of a formal package that's transmitted to the council. As we close up here, I don't know if Mayor Kate or Councilmember Searcy, is there anything you want to provide around the 13th, or anything the task force should be prepared for, or do we want to do that on Thursday?
We can do it on Thursday, but people can start thinking like the 13th is a special meeting of the City Council, so we have as much time as we need. There's nothing else on the agenda. This is it. So I scheduled this specifically because I didn't want to try and shoehorn it into our regular council meeting on Wednesday night, because I didn't want to have the task force feel like, oh, we are constrained to a 15-minute presentation, and for council to feel like they were constrained. So I would maybe, if some folks want to think about this, look to you all on what you want to do on the night of the 13th. So.
Perfect. So Mayor Kate and Councilmember Searcy, why don't we add that as an item for Thursday, which is kind of our last formal task force meeting. We'll add that as an item so we can prepare for how this is transmitted, how we talk about it on the 13th. We'll also pull up all of the supplemental information that's going to be attached to the report. Again, task force, it's stuff you've seen. It's just lived in all the folders we've been sharing. We want to make sure this is all easily accessible so that folks who take this forward, including the task force that will look at this in the future, has all the information together. Does that work? Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for hanging with us tonight. Appreciate it. This recording will be available, and we'll send around an updated recommendations. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.